Call the meeting to order, the meeting of the Planning Commission, and we'll ask for the roll.
Thank you, Chair, and Happy New Year, everybody. Commissioner Badami.
Here.
Commissioner Hudis.
Here.
Commissioner Hanson.
Here.
Commissioner Janoff.
Here.
Commissioner Birch.
Here.
Vice Chair Kane.
Here.
And Commissioner O'Donnell.
Here. All right, so if you'll all join us in the Pledge of Allegiance, Commissioner Badami will lead us. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Before we get into the agenda as such, I'll just remind everybody that if anybody wants to speak, there are two ways to speak. One can speak on an agenda item, which looks like most of you are here for an agenda item. But we also begin the meeting by asking anybody who wants to speak about something not on the agenda. For that, for example, I have one card. So if anybody wants to speak on a matter not on the agenda, please submit a card and we'll call on you. Now, that having been taken care of, let's go on. Are there any subcommittee reports? There apparently are none. And now we'll get into the verbal communications, which I just mentioned to you, and I have one card. Angelia Dorner.
Hello, Angelia Dorner, proud resident of the Almond Grove. I'm so looking forward to the new year, and I wanted to sincerely thank you for your service. One of the items at the town council recently was to increase their pay or compensation to something around $500 a month for gas and everything else and all the time they spend, et cetera, which apparently is about 20 hours a week per, unless you're the mayor, and then it's 40 hours a week. And I know that the only thing that you guys are able to receive is gratitude. Hopefully, please ignore all the other stuff you get from folks. But from this person, this resident, and people that I know, many people, I would like to give you our gratitude for doing the job that you do. And in thinking about this, there's probably about 20 or 30 times that I go through the intersection of Santa Cruz and Highway 9. And thinking about gratitude, I wanted to be able to shout out a huge thank you to Dean and Darren of Double D's for preserving our hillside views and downtown Los Gatos character. They're using the same footprint after that horrible fire, the same footprint, the same roof line. Who knows what the inside's going to be? We all can't wait to see. But, you know, they really respected our downtown character, and I just really want to give them a great shout out for that. I also then look across the street and see the story poles that have been up for over a year, which I probably would imagine will be coming back pretty darn soon, hopefully with a brand new design. But those story poles are for the McCarthy Ranch project. And look at the orange and how much of the hills are covered up from just standing here to here. And that's our panorama. That is the opening to our gateway of downtown. That's what makes us different than all the other revitalized downtowns around. And I'm just really hoping that that we can, that they can talk to their neighbors a little bit more, that they could talk a little bit more to their neighbors and be sure that with this next plan that they bring in, that maybe they preserve a little bit more of those hillsides and that maybe they talk to a little bit more of their neighbors and hopefully respect and consider our downtown. And I once again just want to thank Double D's. And I'd love to have them talk to their neighbor about what helped make their decision. And hopefully someday we'll have a picture like this, a statue at that corner somewhere to depict the feeling of Los Gatos.
All right, thank you very much, and Happy New Year to you, too. Okay, so that's I think the only item on that agenda. So the next thing we have is consent items, and that's only one, and that's the minutes, which are before you. So if there are any questions about the minutes or a motion, Commissioner Badami?
I move to approve the consent item, which consists of the approval of minutes from December 13th of 2017.
Is there a second? Commissioner Birch? All right.
I will second.
Any discussion? All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Passes unanimously. All right, so I think we can move on to item number 2, which is the Alberto Way matter. On the last meeting, we closed the meeting to public comment. We invited any written comment, and we have received some written comment. So what we're going to do this evening is have a discussion between the members of the Planning Commission on their thoughts, and I would assume at the end of those discussions, we'll have a motion. And first, I guess I should say, Commissioner Badami, because of her proximity to the project, is going to recuse herself and will come back for the next item.
That is correct. My residence is located within 500 feet of the project application. I will
Thank you.
return.
We'll see you hopefully soon. All right, so I will simply ask now for people, whoever wants to start with the comments. I would imagine we all have some comments. So who would like to, well, what we can do, if you don't mind, we can go down the line if you'd like. So I can start with Commissioner Hughes.
Thank you. Knew I had a few comments.
When did you not?
I wanted to kind of remark on the information that I requested about the widening of Alberto Way. And this information was provided, but it did not, I was unclear. We never received a before and after diagram showing how much. We received some textual information, and in that information, it raised a concern that the widening, which was represented to be, I think, 3 feet approximately, eventually tapers back to the original property line. And the eventually looked to me, the way that the text description proceeded, that was referring to the entrance to Alberto Way, where I have the most concerns about safety. And and I know I expressed this in the very first hearing that we had on this subject, that we have a population that lives on Alberto Way that occasionally does avail themselves of the use of emergency services and vehicles, and that we also have a situation where we get gridlock on Highway 9. And as far as I can see, that gridlock situation was never studied as part of the traffic analysis. The dates on which the traffic was observed were not at the times when, at least as far as I can tell, and there were no words in the traffic exhibit about the gridlock traffic that's occurred there. And so my concern goes beyond convenience with regard to traffic. It goes to safety and the ability of an emergency vehicle to turn onto Alberto Way. And I did not find the information provided by the applicant entirely satisfying as to that point in terms of how much wider it would be and whether emergency vehicles would be able to make that kind of access. And so those concerns remain for me.
Thank you. Moving down the line.
I spent a lot of time over the last few weeks reading through all of our previous minutes and watching the tapes and whatnot. And so I kind of was trying to distill this down to, what the essential issues were. And it seemed like in terms of the comments that we've had made, the main issues relate to 4 areas at the moment: size, traffic, and some of these are interrelated. The geology or the garage, and then the views. And it kind of occurred to me that although we weren't, because we didn't approve the ANS in the original hearing decision in May, we didn't go through the EIR. But as I went back and read through the EIR, and basically the EIR has found that there are no impacts in most of these areas that can't be mitigated. And so then I was kind of left with there's also the issue of we have to think of it in terms of compliance with the general plan and also with our commercial design guidelines. So I'm not sure. I wonder about how the best way it is to go about looking at the EIR, because it has so much interrelationship with the rest of the project. Just for example, in terms of size, I kind of thought about it. I was like, well, everybody would like it to be smaller, of course, but there isn't any standard for size other than the lot coverage and the height of it. And then if you're worried about the size, what is the impact of size? And to me, it would be in terms of the views and of the traffic. And those are both covered in the EIR. And you can disagree with the methodology of the EIR, but I don't think that's our jurisdiction. So that's a question I had, is whether or not, my recollection when we've gone through EIRs before is that what we can really comment on is whether or not we think the mitigation is appropriate. So that's a question I have. And so then I kind of went back to this whole issue of size, and we've had a lot of more requests for having objective standards, and I think council was looking for us to come up with a number that related to something. And so at the moment, the proposal is based on the reduced alternative that's in the EIR, and you can decide whatever that number is. But I also had a question kind of about how to think about neighborhood, because clearly the people on Alberta Way think that this isn't compatible with the neighborhood, but we don't have a neighborhood analysis standard for commercial like we do for residential. And so I wondered about the right way to think about that. And I know in the past, we, for example, had the hearings on the office building in Winchester, and even though that building is twice as big as the next commercial building down the street, it didn't factor into the ultimate decision by council in terms of whether or not to approve the project. So, and also during the council hearings on this particular project, the council didn't, in particular, they asked about the sizes of the buildings, commercial buildings that were in the neighborhood on Alberta Way and also across the street, but they didn't necessarily give direction that you need to reduce the size to the next biggest building in the neighborhood. So another question I kind of have is about how to think about the neighborhood, because there's the aspect of this being on a very small street, but it's also bordering a major highway. And according to the EIR, 40% of all the traffic that's going to go in and out of the facility is going to go on to 17. So from that perspective, it's in a different kind of neighborhood, and it's more related to downtown, even though it's on Alberta Way. So those are the issues that I have in my mind in terms of questions, and what we got to resolve is these 4 issues and size and the geology and the views and the traffic, and whether or not there's anything else we can do to make it more acceptable, or whether it's good enough right now.
Let me say this. There may be some questions here that we would like to direct to staff, and we can certainly do that. On the other, and I think we will, but there's also, the flow at the moment is pretty good. It's moving along, which you should not assume means that we're not going to come back to you and you won't have an opportunity to direct questions to staff, because you will. So I just want to make that clear, because I've heard some questions from both of you, and so we're not ignoring those. So, Commissioner Janoff.
Yeah, I think the main concerns for me boil down to essentially the same as my fellow commissioners so far. But this is what I would call an an overly constrained problem. We've got the neighborhood on one side requesting a smaller footprint and not a two-story subterranean garage. We've got the developer requesting just the opposite. And it seems to me that's the real crux of the issue, because if you did reduce the size of the building, then you would reduce the amount of traffic that comes in. It may not be to the level that the residents would prefer, but it also seems clear that the town council has accepted the traffic study and is satisfied that there won't be a significant impact. So that leaves us in a bit of a quandary. I think one of the issues, well, one of the speakers last meeting indicated that they would be amenable to a larger footprint above ground if we could make some other changes. So can you reduce the subterranean footprint, or could you create a larger footprint above ground and reduce the height of the building somewhat? I'm not sure what that would do with regard to size, overall square footage, but one of the key things that comes through in every single neighbor's comments is the views and how important the views are to those neighbors. My guess, and I could be wrong, my guess is that the neighbors will be willing to accept the subterranean two-story garage, and I'm putting ideas in your heads that I know you've objected to, if the footprint could reflect a reduced height so that the views of the neighborhood could be preserved. So my sense is there's a bit of intractability on both sides, and I think in order for us to get to a decision, a little bit has to give somewhere. So those would be the two areas that I'd like to see discussion around.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Birch?
Not to repeat anything that my fellow commissioners said, I do know that we've been tasked by council to be more factual and objective in the items that we're discussing. And I know that there's a few issues that came up last time as far as, that have been continued concern. I also would be curious to hear what staff has to say about the traffic and the EIR, because it's my understanding that I believe that ship has sailed. I believe the EIR is a validated final item, and they've met the mitigation requirements is what we've been requested, but I'll be interested to hear staff's comments when we get to that point. As far as the parking garage, I'm actually less concerned about the levels of parking garage. We've been attempting to encourage this for a very long time to keep cars off ground level, and having a background in it, I understand the water displacement. So I actually am appreciative of the fact of keeping cars off the street. There's enough parking already on the street. So then it starts coming down more to items such as mass, neighborhood compatibility, and views. And if we look to our residential and our town guidelines, we speak of the views a lot. And when I look back at the item that I've heard that I feel like perhaps we can speak to the best tonight, it's views. But again, I'm going to ask a little bit of staff on how we analyze that, because I believe the size of the buildings have already been deemed relatively appropriate by council based on my last viewing of the council's hearing and the recommendations of the mayor. So I'm a little concerned we're at that point in this conversation. So there's a couple of comments I'd like back from staff when it's time.
Thank you, Vice Chair Kane.
I couldn't say it much better than Commissioner Hanson did in identifying the issues. Size, traffic, geology, views. I've tried to understand the geology, and I'll defer to Commissioner Birch and others who know better. That's just simply not an issue for me at this time, having read and reread what I thought maybe I understood. But size remains an issue. And if size could be addressed in the way I might like it to be, traffic and views might be addressed as well. But as it is right now, I've gone through the town code. I have sections I can read tonight. I've gone through the general plan, which, if you read this late at night, it brings a tear to your eye. It's really a passionate document, and over it talks about protecting and preserving, while we need business development, it needs to be within the context of all of these provisions designed to protect and preserve the town. In the commercial design guidelines, it's a condensed version of what's all over the general plan. And so much of the general plan, preserve and enhance existing character and place. It even talks about our seniors in more than one sense, that we should protect the people who live here. It talks about infill projects, limited to do this and do that. And I think we get tied up in the science of numbers. 3 by 5 by 2 by 6. And because the land is big enough, you can put in a 4-story building. No, you can't. Because the town code, the general plan, commercial guidelines prohibit it with rather clear and compelling, albeit subjective standards. When you've got subjective standards, you've got to really make a good case. And I think the 300 people have made a good case. I'm not saying it's not in compliance with these things. 300 people have written us impassioned letters over and over to preserve their quality of life. My view of the environmental impact report is that it is not sine qua non. It's a go, no-go. So the environmental impact report, if accepted, simply says nothing it's doing can be mitigated. It doesn't say it gets approval. I asked at our last meeting to, again quoting Denzel Washington, talk to me like I'm a 6-year-old and explain to me what a Class A building it is and why is there such a fuss. The applicant, or the appellant, sent me a letter, or sent Jennifer on her letter, copy me, and it quotes an authority they refer to as 42. And it says Class A office definition by 42 floors. So I guess they're an authority on defining such things. I want to read just a part of it. Class A buildings are coveted, highly sought spaces of significant size, usually in a central location. In a central business district, this could mean 250,000 square feet or more. In a suburban location, or smaller metropolitan area, a 50,000 square foot building might qualify. All right, I got a definition now. So I then look at the 72,000 as maybe a case is being made for fiscal necessity, and the profitability of a project is not my department. I don't think. I'll stand corrected. But whether or not it makes money, and do we sell the project because it makes money and give up all of these words on protecting and preserving and people that are concerned? I can't do that. I need to know that in here there's something that says they can't come down below 72,000. And the document they've given me said in a suburban or smaller location, a 50,000 square foot building might qualify. That's their letter, not mine. Mr. Thaden, Mr. Riley, experts both state that more than 95% of Class A office space provides larger floor plates ranging from 35 to 40,000 square feet. That's 95%. Cynically, I look at that and say the other 5% in small suburban locations, that would kind of tend to make sense. I'm telling you what my issues are, and I'm telling you that I've read and reread the letters from let's call them the 300 Spartans. And they can't be ignored. They're very difficult to ignore. I have no life. I watched the town council meeting, the one that we're referring to, what was that, December 13th or something, and I watched the end of it twice. A motion was made with 4 points on it: square footage, trees, something else, and it failed. Another motion was made on square footage, trees, and something else, and it failed. A third motion was made to say that the appeal was being granted specific to new information and send it back to the town council. And when our meeting, last time we discussed this, that was interpreted to mean, I believe I'm correct, as de novo. So we take this from scratch. And in taking this from scratch, I look at the 92,000 to the 86,000 to the 72,000, 74,000, and I feel, golly gee, maybe there's some more room to go here. And I did question why the offer of 72,260 coincidentally matched the exact number in the draft EIR. I didn't get a very good answer to that, so I feel it's an odd coincidence, and maybe we have some room to go, and maybe if we work on that size, we can get an issue that deals with traffic and views and the safety and the virtual panic from the 300 people who live here. I got a letter articulating that there's the development on Highway 9 and there's development in the back, and these 300 people are caught in between those, and they're both growing. And that's just simply undeniable. I got to find a way around that. Thank you for the time.
Thank you. When we look at this, my comment, I guess, is this. We have to decide the architecture and site application, the conditional use permit, and the environmental impact report. So the environmental impact report, if I read this correctly, has not been approved or adopted, but we would do that. So if you find something fundamentally wrong with the EIR, you just wouldn't approve the EIR. I find nothing fundamentally wrong with the EIR. We've all sat on this before, and I know in a perfect world we would make a substantial reduction in this. Having observed what the council seems to want, I find myself with two choices here. One can simply strike out and come up with a number they're personally comfortable with, or one can say, if we assume that, as the council has said, the number used in the EIR, even though it is just a number, but I read the council to use that number as a good number. If one assumes that the council thinks that is a good number, what is it we can do? Because we can send something back to the council that will not help them, or we can send something back to the council that may help them. And what I see as helpful would be if we don't like something about the design, not the square footage, but the design or the height, again, not the square footage, because the developer has given us these numbers and also has said we have a couple, 2 or 3 letters from their attorney on the EIR and the impact of economics. Unlike many things in an EIR, economics are considered, i.e. is it a feasible project. So I guess I'm beginning to view what we could do tonight of a profitable nature is to see if we could do anything by way of dealing with either the design. Our town architect wrote 2 or 3 letters, not all of which have been followed, his comments, many of which have been. Is there anything we can do with the design which does not reduce the square footage? Is there anything we can do with the height? And the height has come down, I think it's 5 feet, further, which would help the views, but also, at the end of the day, I would like to do something that would help the council and not have the council simply disregard what we've done. Because I think if we do something helpful to the people who live in that neighborhood, that will be better than simply sending it back up again and having something come down which is not as good as maybe what we could do. So I would hope that tonight we can try to come up with something. Some of you will say, as I think Vice Chair Kane has, he seems to be more definite in rejecting the project. I am not. To the extent that we can make the project better without rejecting it, personally, I think that might be more helpful to everybody. So I throw that out. Now, what I'm going to ask at the moment is we have a number of questions we wanted to ask staff. And unless somebody has a better suggestion, I'll start again with Commissioner Hudes and see what his questions are. Then we'll go to Commissioner Hanson and so on. So, Commissioner Hudes?
Yeah, I had really 2 questions of staff. One gets to Vice Chair Kane's comment about considering this as a de novo application. And I've given some thought to this, and I wanted to understand from the attorney's perspective and from staff's perspective this process a little bit better. So, you know, we denied this. It was appealed. It went to council. Council was presented with new information and remanded it back to us. And in doing so, they deliberated, and they asked that their deliberation be part of the record. So is it my understanding that we should consider those deliberations that were not necessarily part of the formal motion, but were part of the discussion in terms of the parameters that we have in looking at the project. That's a question for staff.
I saw his hand up, so I didn't know if
Well, I
he...
think the question is directed to
Yes.
you and anybody in staff that wants to join in.
So it's a combination of both. You're absolutely correct that the councils gave direction and told you to review the deliberations that they have, and that's been provided to you to look at. And so you're supposed to take that into consideration as you move through this, just as the entire record is even the previous hearings are part of this record. You've heard already testimony about it going from 90 to 80 and now down to 70. So that's all part of your thought process as you deliberate. But you're not, in the sense that, as Commissioner Kane says, this is de novo, and that your hands are not tied to decide how you want to rule on this project. The council didn't say to send it back and make sure you approve it. But they did say to take into consideration their deliberations. It's the same as if the Supreme Court of the United States says, or the California Supreme Court sometimes remands it back to the trial court to redo its ruling and take into consideration the ruling that they've made, when you now use that as evidence to decide how you want to.
Right. And we're not an appellate court for the council. In other words,
No.
if, you know,
It's a remand. They're the appellate
the
court.
other way around. And so, and I think it's also fair to the community, the community at large, for us to respect the process and to take into account. Now, the council was not unanimous, but there were points that the council seemed to converge on. And so I reviewed both of the council meetings to try to understand what some of those points were. And you know, some of them had to do with a significant reduction in size. I think it had been proposed 4,000, but I think we're seeing something more in the line of 8,400. And we're seeing some other things in reaction to that guidance that, to me, I need to think about where the council was in their deliberations as part of what we're doing, you know, in the process. So I just wanted to make sure that that was okay to do that, and it made sense to do that. I had a second question that's specific to the width of Alberta Way, and my opening comment about this. So what is, do you know what the current and the proposed width of Alberta is, particularly at the entrance area?
I don't know those numbers off the top of my head, but we do have staff from our Public Works Department. I also do believe that at your December meeting, while you did close public comment in general, you left it open for questions of the applicant, and they do have their consultants here as well. So I'm going to defer, see if staff would like to answer that.
Wait a minute, before we go, I want to get this clear. My understanding is nobody is going to speak, because if we allow, we invited written comments. I would not personally feel comfortable about allowing one side to make oral comments and not the other, and Lord knows, I don't think we want to reopen the whole thing. So that's just my feeling. I'm not offering a legal opinion. I'll defer to counsel for that.
So specifically at your last meeting, though, you were still in the question phase of the applicant, so you were still able to do that. They can't make any closing statements, but they could ask your specific questions, because that's where you were at. But if you don't feel comfortable with that, the chair and commission, then they would not.
I'm just one person, so if the balance of the commissioners would want to do that, I would, of course.
I don't want to take the commission in a whole direction. I had assumed we were going to ask some questions to follow up. I could direct them to staff if the rest of the commission would prefer.
Well, we have, what I guess I don't understand is we have drawings. We also have a proposal. The drawings did not show the removal of the bend in the road, as I understand it. And then there was a proposal made to do that, and I think it was 980-something square foot dedication or conveyance, I don't know which. But I mean, I can't apportion the 980 feet to show how it cuts off the curve, but do we have a drawing showing what that 980 square feet, how it comes out.
So yes, we do have, let's see, sheet A1.01 does show the right-of-way width after the dedication would be 63 feet wide. Let's see. We've got a 10-foot lane, a 5-foot bike lane, and then a second 10-foot lane for the right turn that's being shown there.
Now, let me make this suggestion. You're getting a lot of information fairly quickly. We're not through, and if the end of our questions, you want to go back to that, but I would invite you to spend a little time to look at it unless you don't need any more time.
No, I probably do need some time and some questions. I tried to do it with my little ruler, but these have been reduced and I couldn't get to the actual size. I was trying to understand how that relates to the width of a normal vehicle and an emergency vehicle, and I did get some information on that, and I wanted to go through that either with staff or with the applicant's.
All right, well, I guess I'm asking you is what you've just heard, you need more than that.
I had some other questions on it.
Oh, I don't mean other questions, I mean about that specific question. If you do, we can pursue that, we can ask other staff on it, or we can defer and come back later. What would you like to do?
Well, I'd prefer to ask these questions, and if staff can answer them, great, and if
Okay,
not, then.
and
you know.
you're not satisfied then yet with the answer you just heard?
Yeah, it isn't helpful enough for me to make a determination.
What specifically would you like to know then?
So I would like to know, with 63 feet, how does that relate to the 25 feet that was just given?
So the 25 feet in terms
10
of...
plus 5 plus 10.
Yes. So the 65-foot right-of-way, that's the area or the width of the land that would be owned by the town. But that does also include sidewalks, the planter strip, and such on both sides of the street. Plus, that's just the southbound Alberta Way, the lanes that I just discussed. There is also a 16-foot wide lane going northbound on Alberta. And then it looks like 12 feet for the sidewalk and planter on the other side. And about 10 feet on the Alberta Way side. One comment I would add in terms of the straightening of the street, while there is still a curve, I do believe that the width of the proposed dedication is widest at the bend of the curve, so that it would actually be straightened somewhat. It's not a constant width all the way along the length of the dedication.
Right.
And I would just offer that the sheet that Ms. Armour referenced, I think was A1.01, the actual roadway width is labeled as 41 feet. So that would include the two 10-foot lanes, the 5-foot in between those, as well as the 16-foot lane on the other side. So the total roadway is labeled as 41 feet.
And that's currently, what was the original proposal before? How much did they widen the roadway, is what I'm getting at?
About leaving?
We'll look for that information. I'm assuming it's 3 feet or less, given that the information.
Well, I was concerned that it was 0 because of the way it was stated that in their letter, they state that it eventually tapers back to the original property line.
And I think I'll defer to Ms. Armour as well, but I think if you look at the sheet A1.00, which is just before the sheet we were just talking about, going from Highway 9 north, you'll notice a little cross-hatched area, and obviously the...
Oh, could you hold for a second? He's still trying to find...
Sure.
Sorry. Is it toward the back?
It is the sheet right before the one we were just speaking of. So it's A1.00. And so Ms. Armour will try to pull that sheet out and put that up on the overhead.
Right, this is the one I put my little ruler
Now
on.
hold for a second, because now she's trying to get it on the board.
So it looks like it is the fifth sheet in the plan set.
You can walk over to the, board if you wish. It's much larger there.
Okay, I'm on the same page here.
Okay. So are you following? Go ahead.
So Ms. Armour, if you could grab the handheld mic and you can point that area out.
All right, so you can see that it is widest at this point here, at the sharpest bend of the curve. And so it's a 3 foot 6 inch width of dedication. You can see that it narrows as we get down to closer to the property line on this side, towards the residential neighborhood. As you go this way, it also narrows some, but it does extend and stay at this location. It's at 2 feet 9 inches. So it does include close to 3 foot dedication all the way up to the intersection, which allows for the new bike lane that's proposed and bike box.
So I guess the question is, with regard to emergency vehicle, does that help an emergency vehicle get into that street over what, the way the existing condition is?
The fire department has looked at the proposed project and they have no concerns about access.
Okay, so, but the question is, you know, has this improved that situation with this dedication?
I believe that the area for the dedication is, it's allowing for that free right turn, which may ease traffic flow, because it extends down Alberta Way. It also does have the bike lane, but the width of all of the lanes are sufficient for standard vehicles and emergency vehicle access.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, again, may we move on, and you can come back if you have further questions. Okay, Commissioner Hanson?
Okay, I had a few questions. The question I asked when I was speaking about comments about the project, and I think just for the benefit of everyone in the audience as well, the criteria that we're supposed to use for reviewing an EIR.
I'm actually going to defer to the environmental consultant and let him speak to that.
Could I hold 1 second? I don't know whether that's a legal question or a factual question, because if it's a legal question, I think we should defer to the lawyer.
I was thinking it was more of a legal question.
That's what I'm
yeah,
thinking,
Yeah,
too.
like what?
And hopefully you know better
What
as a lawyer.
discretion? Let me ask a more specific question. What discretion does the Planning Commission have in reviewing an EIR?
I'm not sure I even understand the question. What do you mean, what is your discretion? You either can approve the EIR or deny the EIR. Let me step back a little bit and explain again, I think we've gone through these steps, what the EIR, it's really just a document to provide you with knowledge. It's a informational document to show you what the impacts are and what if there are significant impacts, then how they can be mitigated. This CEQA document says that all the impacts can be mitigated to less than significant. So you have to weigh the evidence to determine whether there's any evidence that's substantial that brings that into question. And then potentially you could base your denial on that if you make the findings. A couple other things I would point out, though. Environmental impacts are not because of community angst, because they're upset about the project. It's not because property values might be get down. It can't be done by quality of life. And then the other part of that is you have to look at the significant impacts caused by the project. Because there's gridlock out there now and there might not be emergency access available, doesn't mean you can deny the project. You have to look at what the impacts are from the actual project, and that's what the EIR document does.
Okay, so just a related question to that. So supposing that that we thought there was a better mitigation for the solution, that could be a reason to recommend a different mitigation?
Yes, you could attach additional conditions, and I think you've kind of done that in the staff report to show, based on some of the evidence that has been brought, there's additional mitigation measures that need to be put in to address any impacts. That's
Okay.
absolutely.
So then this is the second question on the EIRs for staff then. So in reading through the section on the aesthetics, and I think the majority of the commissioners mentioned this stuff on view. So if you read the EIR, they basically say, I'm going to summarize what they said, but it's along the lines of the views on Alberta Way right now are obstructed without the project. They're obstructed by trees. They're, at least partially, they're obstructed by trees. They're obstructed by the 35-foot tall 3 buildings that are there now. And so their conclusion was that because our code allows up to a 35-foot building, that while there will be partial blockages of some parts of the view, that it's already blocked, and so therefore it's not significant. So I guess where I'm at in this thing is back to approving the EIR or not. If we agree that the EIR has no impacts, can we? What grounds do we have to say we need to change the view? I mean, we have the general plan and the commercial design guidelines. I understand that, but it doesn't that create a conflict?
I think you actually hit it exactly. You do have those other documents. The environmental impact report is based on the regulations in CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act. And so those are the regulations that are put in place by the state. In addition to those, and the determination based on those of no impact, we also have other guidance documents. We have our general plan. We have our commercial design guidelines. And so what you are considering tonight is not just the EIR and its analysis, but also your interpretation of our guidance documents.
Okay.
And I would just add as well that it's important to understand. I know we've talked about this before. Staff believes that the EIR is legally adequate, meets the requirements of CEQA. The town does not have any objective thresholds of what diminishing of views would constitute an environmental impact. And so the other documents, you could certify an environmental impact report that does not require you to approve a project. So I think it's important to remember that there are certain thresholds, and these were reviewed when the environmental impact report was prepared, and the determinations were that there are no significant impacts that cannot be mitigated to a less than significant level.
Okay, good. So moving on, I had a question about this Class A issue. So I too read through the information provided by the applicant, and I actually had found that website where they talked about the 42, whatever. I found that on my own before I read this, and I thought, but the thing is there's so the applicant had support from some realtors that are active in leasing this kind of space that said that they're looking for floor plates of 35 to 40,000. But I wondered if it didn't depend on the number of employees as well. I mean, certainly because of amenities, I can see why they need a bigger floor plate. But I also thought that we probably had some other Class A office space in Los Gatos, and we don't have a lot of buildings, this commercial buildings this large in Los Gatos. And I thought that I read that the building that was just approved on Winchester is considered Class A. So that was my question. Is that Class A? Because that is much smaller.
So I would say I think the applicant definitely intends on the Winchester project to create a Class A project, and so other even commissioners may have some additional input on Class A. Applicant has provided input on that. There obviously are a number of factors that go into those numbers, both higher and lower, and site constraints obviously would be one of those. Winchester has different site constraints than this site. I would say, the most recent Class A is probably the Netflix facility,
Right.
which is the 435,000 square feet or 485, I can't remember, in 4 buildings. So it really is site specific. This is what the applicant has provided from their justification standpoint, and then from brokers who do deal with these types of projects in the valley. But ultimately, it's up to the commission with all of these topics, frankly, to make a determination as to whether or not you believe this is the appropriate project for this specific site.
That's perfectly fine. So that makes sense. Okay, so then on the traffic, there was a discussion in the town council meeting, and that didn't resolve itself into any follow-up per se, but this was back to the traffic and the proposed improvements include a dedicated right turn lane, and then there will be a shared left through lane. And the topic came up about, and I was looking at some of the drawings that some of the people in the neighborhood put up about. So the people that are going to would be coming into Alberta Way would be coming probably off of 17, taking a left onto Alberta Way, and then taking a left in the property. People on the other side of the street are going to be taking a left while they're taking a left. And so I thought in the morning, I wondered if it wouldn't, even though the traffic impact analysis didn't flag it as a safety issue, if it wouldn't be safer to have a dedicated left turn lane. And I thought I remembered our Parks and Public Works staff saying that more parking spots would have to be given up, but I don't remember exactly what. So I was just curious about that. That even though the traffic impact analysis didn't flag that as a safety issue, would it in fact be safer if we had a dedicated turn lane in the middle? And then what would it take to make that happen, given the width of the street now?
And a bit of clarification. When you're talking about a left turn lane, you're meaning a left turn lane going into the project?
No.
Or left turn at the intersection with Highway 9?
I was thinking of either or a dedicated left turn lane going out of Alberta Way, so there would be a right turn lane, there could be an either and then an only left turn lane. But I wondered if it wouldn't be better to have a two-way turn lane, although I don't know if there's enough space to make that safe, so that if people wouldn't be blocking traffic going through, there would be like a dedicated turn lane in the middle. So that was a couple ideas I thought of. So I wondered if that would in fact approve it, or would it be worse, and what it would take to get that.
Good evening, Commissioners. Mike Weiss, Associate Engineer. In regards to adding a dedicated left turn lane in addition to a through lane, it would require additional right-of-way width. In regards to the safety, I'm going to defer that to our transportation consultant, Colin Burgett from TJCAM.
At that location, the use of a left turn lane would primarily be in the morning. So about 150 cars or so making left turns into the project during the morning peak hour. And at that time, the through volume is very low, be less than 50 cars. So there just isn't a high enough volume to warrant a separate left turn lane and through lane based on that relatively low through volume in the morning. And in the afternoon, the left turn volume may be pretty low, maybe only about 30 cars making a left turn into the project. And so at that time, the left turn volume in the afternoon would be too low to warrant a left turn lane. And from a safety perspective, overall, the volumes are relatively low. And since most of the morning cars are making a left turn, it wouldn't be a situation that sometimes occurs on other streets where the majority of traffic is through traffic and they're surprised by a left turn.
And so what you're saying is and it would really only be the issue in the morning, and in the afternoon, the majority of the people coming out of the project are going to be turning right onto Highway 9 and getting on 17 or going elsewhere.
Right.
So it wouldn't be an issue. And then in the morning, you're not going to have a lot of traffic going the other way.
Exactly.
Okay. Okay, good. That helps a lot. All right.
I'm going to stop you for a minute
Okay.
because we're going to move back and forth, I think, rather than spending too much time on one person. So Commissioner Janoff?
I'm sort of fixated on the idea of changing the footprint as proposed for the 74,000, and thinking about what Commissioner O'Donnell has said in understanding that the town council is possibly interested in or would approve a 74,000. How can we make that work, at least footprint and parking wise? So one of the questions I have is, in Exhibit 31, there's a report from Caltrans, and on page 2 of that, there is a list of traffic demand management suggestions. And one of the bullet points says a 10% vehicle parking reduction. So my question is, currently at 74,000 square feet, they are required to provide 298 parking spaces. Would the town be willing to impose a 10% vehicle parking reduction on the property owner in order to reduce the number of parking spaces required, so it would give them a little more flexibility, for instance, enlarging the footprint on the surface, which would eliminate some parking spaces? So a 10% reduction from the 298 would drop the parking requirement down to about 260 or so parking spaces, 260, 270.
So ultimately, if that's a decision that the commission wants to include in whatever decision they ultimately make this evening, that's definitely possible. I think in those types of scenarios, you run the risk of then having cars need to park on the streets in the adjacent neighborhood, which becomes challenging. So that would be the one caution I would have. The other would be, removing that amount of spaces then removes probably most of the surface parking that they're proposing. And if I remember correctly, there was a suggestion or request to add surface parking. So it may reduce some of the excavation if they chose to take that out of the underground garage, but you still would have 2 levels underground. And I don't know if our Parks and Public Works staff has any additional input on that. Seeing none.
Okay,
I don't at the moment. Every question I've come up with has been asked so far, so.
okay. Mr. Murch has no questions then. Vice Chair Kane?
As I said earlier, I watched the town council deliberations twice last night, and I started writing without using any names, unless you've watched it. That there was concessions at town council and not at the planning commission regarding new information, essentially that this was de novo. It was mentioned to incorporate the town council guidance. There was disagreement with that because there was disagreement with the motion that had failed twice. Somebody said 4,000 feet. Somebody said no, not just 4,000 feet reduction, at least. Somebody said 74,000. Somebody said no, not an arbitrary number. The maker of the motion said there's no specifics in my motion. Reduce, leave open the specifics. New motion, town council, planning commission should use all information available. And the mayor said, focus on objective criteria. Give us, not what shall be the numbers. And I mentioned earlier that one of the town council people said it went from 92,000 to 87,000 to 74,000, and it was said that when we got the planning commission, maybe then we'd get their best shot. And I'd like to try and make a best shot, and I've made a case for the Class A from 42 as being 50,000. There was another number here at 55,000. I want to go back and reiterate, when the EIR talked about, the draft EIR talked about 74,000, it said that such a reduction would then likely allow for one underground garage. And I'm thinking that certainly in the neighborhood of 55,000, we'd be looking at the likelihood of one underground garage, which alleviates a lot of people's concerns, could alleviate traffic, could alleviate views, could alleviate size. So I don't know how we get there, Mr. Chairman, but we've got the room and we've got a green light to make an offer or to make a motion in the 50s to see if we can get a 55 Class A, which is what 42 says clearly is possible, and get a one-level garage. And in that way, look for a compromise to address the concerns of the neighborhood. There will be increased traffic, there will be reduced views, there will be this, there will be that. But it'd be better than what we have right now if we can get a smaller number.
You can't compromise with somebody who isn't present, and we've closed the public comment, so there will be no compromise unless you say, we've made a compromise, we've told you what you're going to do, but that's probably not a compromise. So,
That's a good point, and I'm confused.
I'm not entering in a dialogue.
When they asked us to give them specific numbers, what did that mean?
You are out of order, and I've asked you to be quiet for the moment. It's my turn, and I'm going to talk. I don't think we can redo the project. If you want to turn it down, you can turn it down. My view is, notwithstanding reading the tea leaves as to what the council wanted, the number they used was the number that I would not have used, but it was a number from the EIR, and I think some of the council people focused on that. I guess my view is this project, in many respects, is a very good project. The biggest objection of everybody is it's too big. And I said that the first night we heard this, and I was talking about a very substantial reduction. As I read this over and over again, I am convinced that the applicant is saying only at a certain level can I afford the improvements of this project. If you want a different project, maybe you'll have a different applicant. Maybe you'll have a totally different project. But if you want this project, I don't think you're going to go down to 50 or 55,000 square feet. You will have a totally different. So if you want to turn the project down, we can recommend that. And you know, as I say, who knows what the council would do? But my feeling is that council will not turn the project down if a reasonable steps are taken. The only thing I can see as giving us a better assurance of helping anyone on this project, and I have not heard a word of it yet, is there anything we can do with either the height or the design without affecting in any substantial way the square footage? Because the applicant is saying, basically, I need something like this square footage. And if we do that, then I can afford these other things. We have not pursued, nor have we had a suggestion tonight, is there anything else that could be done and leave the square footage alone? Everybody may disagree with that, but at the end of the day, I think that would be more helpful to the council, and if it's more helpful to the council, it will be more helpful to everybody sitting here, because it's not going to be helpful to the neighbors to find out that a 74,000 square foot project has been approved as proposed without any input from us as to how we might make that project better. So Commissioner Janoff has her hand. Maybe she can help me there.
I have some ideas, Commissioner. I just wanted to go back to Commissioner Kane's question. If I back calculate the amount of square footage that would be possible given a single-story underground garage plus above-ground parking, I'm just using the structure that they have currently proposed. It's 137, I believe, on the first floor of the underground, plus 32 surface spaces, so that's 169. If you calculate, if you divide the 74 by the number of parking spaces they're proposing, which is according to the town requirement, it gives you a certain number. You multiply that number by the 169, the largest building they could create with the current single-story subterranean garage and the above-ground 32 spaces is about 45,000 square feet. So it's small. And I'm guessing that might be unacceptably small to the developer. Maybe great for the neighbors, but that's what I'm calculating. So again, the question is, how can we make this work? Now, in the first proposal that the applicant or that the developer proposed, there were two buildings. They were approximately 45,000 square foot each, which means they had floor plates of less than 25,000 square feet. So the attractiveness of a 25,000 square foot plate was good then, and I'm assuming it's still good now. You've got Class A buildings all over town, all over the county, all over the state, where tenants are leasing anywhere from the entire floor to a couple thousand square feet. So the size of the plate per se isn't a Class A requirement. It's desirable perhaps from a building standpoint or development standpoint because you can make more space and create more money downstream. But it's the amenities. It's are you providing an in-house dry cleaner, a gym for the employees, a cafe for people coming through? Are your materials of construction of a very high quality? That's what defines Class A. And if you look at the Class B buildings that are going through their refurbishment, they're not adding square footage. They're adding amenities. They're adding those things that I just talked about. So I would respectfully suggest that the 37,000 or the 35,000 square foot plate is not necessary for a Class A building. Having said that, I think that there's no doubt in my mind that you can create a 63,000 square foot building to a 74,000 square foot building with a combination of two-story and single-story construction. I think that we've been, through a lot of the deliberation and the expert testimony and some of the documents that we've got, I think we're probably okay with the two-story subterranean parking structure as long as there's appropriate measuring and mitigation for the property owners. So let's allow that there may be a two-story parking garage below in order to reduce the footprint, not reduce the footprint, perhaps increase the footprint up top, but reduce the height. So for instance, if you go back to your original proposal, if the builder goes back to the original proposal, there was a two-story building that came closer to Alberta Way and a two-story building that was a little bit smaller back roughly where the second half of the current proposal is. If the developer increased the size of that, if you increase the size of the left-hand portion of the building out to the original story pole lines and went up. So you've got a big building there. It's not particularly attractive. The entire architecture right now is not particularly attractive. However, the views that the neighbors are asking to be preserved are generally the views that are along the Highway 17 side of the property. So if you allow for a larger two-story building on the Highway 9 side and a one-story construction, could be a nice tall 15-foot interior construction. It could be tall, but it would still give you the views that the neighbors are requesting. Moreover, if the developer was willing to consider that, you could put some of the amenities toward the front of that new two-story building, and some of the amenities that would include a dry cleaner, a cafe, or some other amenities that help the tenants of the building, but could also be available for residents, so the development isn't a complete waste or a complete loss to the neighbors. So my recommendation would be to consider increasing the surface. And the reason I ask about the 10% reduction is if you pull the building out further to the original story pole lines, you're going to lose about 10 parking spaces. So you could say, well, we'll reduce the requirement for so many parking spaces by 10 in order for this to happen. You'd still have some surface parking. You'd still have two-story parking down below. My point in all of this is that there's a way to create the square footage the applicant, the developer is asking for, and allow for views that the residents are asking for. And within the approximate 60 to 70,000 square feet that seems to be on the table.
Let me see if I understand the questions. I want to make sure I'm understanding what you're saying. You're saying you're not necessarily against 74,000 square feet. The range you've talked about now is 60 to 74, I think, or 60 to 72. But you want to get a lower single-story building in part of the property so the neighbor's view would be protected, which would mean then that what I'll call the second building would be larger than it presently is. It would be the same height, but it would be wider. Now, I don't know, and I don't know if anybody knows, whether that could be done in such a fashion that the total square footage asked for by the applicant would be the same, but it would be rearranged. But your suggestion is there is that possibility. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. Now,
And I'm not suggesting that the rearrangement of two-story, one-story would achieve 74,000 square feet, but the original Planning Commission request was to bring it down to 63,000, and the neighbors have pretty much said that the 63,000 would be acceptable, but they also want views. So how do you make that happen? So in deference to the developer, who may want that added square footage, and in deference to the neighbors who would like to have views, I think we can accomplish both by approving a combination of single-story and two-story structures.
Okay, we've got two hands up, and I think Vice Chair Kane had the first.
For the town attorney. We've had involvement from town council, and sometimes we talk about this going back to town council. I wanted your assistance in making this perfectly clear that we in fact are the deciding body right now, and it only goes to town council if it gets appealed. And if we are in fact the deciding body, then we have alternatives to an up or down motion. We can continue the matter to a date certain with specific direction, which means we can adopt, for example, a lot of what Commissioner Janoff just said, or some of the things I said, radical. We can approve the application and put on additional modified conditions, or we can deny it. So I'm saying that we do have constructive input at this point. This is a regular de novo case before us, like every other one we've got. And we can say, I want the roof lower, I want the shingles blue, I want this, and we'll talk further about it in July. So we have the option, as a deciding body, to make revisions, suggest revisions, and continue this to a date certain. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So I'd like to support a lot of what I just heard, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Hudis?
Yeah, I appreciate looking for creative solutions, but I did want to go back to a couple of things, sort of factual things. So the square footage that was considered by the council, what was that square footage that they considered, that they were asking for a further, some of them were asking for 4,000, some of them were asking for 74,000. What was that amount?
The plans that were reviewed by town council was the 83,000.
83,000. So there's been approximately 9,000 square foot reduction from that, correct?
Correct.
Okay. The other thing with regard to Commissioner Janoff and the discussion about 63,000, that was, as she said, the request of the Planning Commission, that's actually not correct. I was on the Planning Commission at that time. One commissioner stated that figure. The commission voted not to determine a 63,000. That was not part of the record. So I am a little concerned about introducing a design or a figure that has never been considered or analyzed. And so what I have heard was the council discussing an application that was 83,000, requesting a reduction, and us getting a revised application for 74,000. So I just wanted to establish that that's kind of where, those are some of the facts that we're dealing with.
If I understand Commissioner Janoff, and this is a question to her, really, you weren't precluding 74, but you were saying there might be a range, and I don't disagree at all with what Commissioner Hughes said, but I don't know where we're quite going at the moment, but were we to say, this is what we think would be satisfactory, you have not precluded 74 in your suggestion. Is that
That's correct.
Okay. Commissioner Hanson.
I appreciate the thoughts. I guess I was kind of more of the mind that my feeling after watching the council hearing is that they pretty much had it narrowed down to just a few things, and that they were pretty happy with a relatively modest size reduction. Although they didn't specifically say that in their motion, that was in their discussion. And so I was kind of more of the mind that we kind of needed to look at this on the merits of what we got from the applicant versus trying to change it materially. And so then what I kind of did for myself is I wrote down what are some reasons to approve this thing, and you know, there actually are some pretty compelling reasons. I mean, the need for the Class A office space, being LEED Gold certified. I mean, we have a sustainability plan in Los Gatos, and we don't have a lot of buildings that are LEED Gold, and so this is a great thing for our sustainability plan. It's zoned for commercial. It meets all the objective standards. No exceptions requested. It's just steps away from Highway 17. The applicant has cooperated and reduced the size. There's no significant impacts in the EIR. And they've gone over and above in terms of the required mitigation, and they've offered additional concessions like the shuttle, which, although isn't a land use issue, it might maybe help a little bit with traffic. So then I wondered about what we could do to make the project better without materially changing it. So I was looking more at stuff like, could the building be made coming a little closer to the street and maybe have the setback on the north side be a little bit more, because there actually is, I went down there today and took some pictures, and there actually is a very nice view of the hills in that area between the north side boundary line and the nearest building, with the exception of a big tree that's kind of blocking part of the view. So I wondered if, I was thinking of things like that, and the public access easements for the surface parking and open space. And I wondered about some other things like, I worry about what has been brought up in the hearings about the trend in the Silicon Valley to reduce the number of square footage per employee. So in order to make sure that the traffic numbers in the traffic impact analysis hold up, I wondered about maybe limiting the number of total employees that could be in the building by a tenant. And, these are relatively less minor things. Maybe, is there a way to remove or like that large pine tree in the northwest part of the property? I also wrote down a written agreement to maintain the shuttle for 3 to 5 years. But those are the kinds of things that I had in mind that would make the project better without materially changing it. And so that was where I came out. I wasn't thinking as much dramatic change in another redesign.
Can I also say this, just listening to everybody? At the moment, I think I've divided the comments sort of into two. A significant revisiting would require a continuance and some instructions to the applicant as to what we wanted. Otherwise, it wouldn't make any sense at all. The other one is not to continue the matter, but to make a decision now, and if you wish to, I guess, impose some additional conditions, although the conditions I've heard now would have to be studied, I think, and that would mean you couldn't very well do it tonight. I don't think you can, and I'm not singling out yours, but any changes of a substantial nature may have to at least go back to the drawing board or have an opportunity to respond to us and say, well, is this a good thing or a bad thing? Because we don't know. We're not supposed to design from up here, and we're not trying to do that. So the fundamental question I guess I have is, Commissioner Janoff has, I think, a good suggestion, but that would require a revisiting, redrawing. Now, the applicant could say, that's not going to do this. It doesn't make any sense to us, and then they could appeal. I personally would like to do something tonight that would be acceptable in the broadest sense to both the applicant and the neighbors. The neighbors have a very, very serious problem that is not going to go away whether you put a 60,000 square foot building there or a 74,000 square foot building. It just isn't. So I guess that being the case, the only thing I would like some direction from the Planning Commission on is something you want to decide tonight, or is it something you want to send back, in other words, continue the matter? I personally, if at all possible, would like to decide the matter tonight. I don't think Commissioner Janoff's suggestion fits that bill, although I like her suggestion, but I think to implement your suggestion, we could not make that decision tonight. Is that your understanding? Okay, so that having been said, I'll throw it back to all of you to hear from you. What do you want to do with this tonight? Commissioner Janoff.
Since I'm causing issues, the residents are seriously unhappy right now. And the developers are essentially following the guidance that was provided by the town council. I think it's incumbent upon us to try to get it as right as we can. And if that takes a little bit more time in what has been a relatively time-consuming process, I think we owe it to the town to do that. I don't know how much additional work is required on the part of the developer to show even conceptually what a single-story, two-story combination might look like. But I do think it's a good step in the direction of helping to come to a reasonable compromise. So I would be willing to take one more meeting to do that.
Okay, can I hear some of the other commissioners on, I think we have two choices in a broad sense. Commissioner Hudes.
I think Commissioner Janoff's suggestions make sense in this situation. I'm very troubled about the concerns that the neighbors have with this project, and I'm concerned that we did not get extremely specific direction from the council. And so, given that, I think it would be good to do another round and take a look at the suggestions that have been made, including those suggestions by Commissioner Hanson that I think are maybe less drastic than complete building redesign. I heard something about exploring building location, which was probably the most significant one that was suggested. I heard understanding whether total employees could be limited, removing a pine tree, codifying the shuttle. And by the way, I think the step to put the shuttle in is very positive. I think it's something that not only helps with traffic, and we were all concerned about the numbers in the traffic impact report, I think it also provides community benefit and is something I wish other developers would consider as well. So I think that if we need to go another round on looking at how that gets codified, I think that's worth it. So, those are all things that make sense. I did read the information on what it would take to go to a single level parking, and although I'm the one that raised that in terms of wanting more information, and certainly the community raised that as an idea, I'm not convinced that it's possible to do that on this site for a variety of reasons that were stated. So I am not reopening that particular item, but the other items make sense to me. And again, along the lines of what Councilmember Jensen's original motion was, and that is to explore these items, to analyze them and come back having explored them, for the applicant to explore them with staff and to present some information back to us.
Let me ask a question of staff. One thing you said that we might be able to get an answer. I have personally not heard of an employee limitation as opposed to a square footage limitation. So I would just direct the question to the three of you. Does anybody have an opinion on whether we could, given whatever the square footage is, could you say, but you may not have more than X employees? I see a head shaking violently no here, but you.
So I'll add to the head shaking. So building occupancy is set by the building code. So we wouldn't be regulating the number of employees, it's occupants. And so that's not something that we would do. And so depending on how it's laid out, then they have to calculate the occupancy for that building, and it has to meet building and fire code. And so
Well, part of the reason I asked the question is, I personally don't want to send it back with a bunch of somewhat ephemeral questions. I would not mind, I haven't made my own decision yet, but if we were to send it back with Commissioner Janoff's suggestions, which I think are concrete, I can understand them. I don't know what the answer is, because the applicant would have to look at it and say, this is doable, it isn't doable, and we can't tell them what's doable and what's not. But at least you can understand what Commissioner Janoff is saying. As to the other things, things like trees and stuff like that, I think we could condition an approval on some reasonable things like that. So I'm not against them, but I just wouldn't want to send it back with too many issues. I would like to be very clear if we were to send it back, so that the applicant would have an incentive to do it. Now, my understanding from the people who live in the neighborhood, they're not just concerned with the view, they're concerned with traffic, they're concerned with all kinds of things. The proposal of Commissioner Janoff, well, a good one, will only address, I think, the view. And it's not clear to me at all that that would satisfy a majority of the applicants, and of the neighbors. If that's the case, it's almost like you've got to address, if you could address satisfactorily most of the concerns of the neighbors, I'm all in favor of it. But this particular suggestion would only address the view, and I don't, my perception of what everybody out here has said, that wouldn't be enough. If that's the case, then I don't know why we would send them back to redraw the thing, because at the end of the day, if you've got 73,000, 74,000 square feet, people are going to go up and say, too much traffic, I can't get an ambulance in here, whatever, and we're not going to have advanced the ball down the field. Commissioner Janoff.
If we were to, well, I think that the proposal on the table, in my opinion, the proposal on the table is not acceptable. So the question is, what portions of that does the Planning Commission reasonably have an opportunity to affect? If the town council, and I believe watching the deliberations of the town council, I think the town, they made it relatively clear they were comfortable with the traffic report, comfortable with the EIR, comfortable with the other concerns that you raised, which the neighbors are not comfortable with. But for us to send it back with a denial, right back, and many of the modifications that are included in this proposal do reflect the suggestions that the town council made, the window glazing and so forth. So if we deny it based on what we have at present, I'm guessing it will be appealed, and the neighbors will have what we have on the table. My view is we can improve what we have on the table so that there's at least some benefit for the neighbors. I'm willing to forego the arguments, and with all respect to the neighbors and your concerns, I appreciate them, I understand them. I think there's some room that I'd like to discuss later. If we get to a point where we want to approve something, I think we can tighten up some of the measures, but or the CUP requirements. But the thing I'm afraid of is that if we deny it, it'll go back to the council and it'll be stamped, because the developer has accommodated many of the requests that some of the town council members had been looking for. So realistically, I think we have very little room here to make some changes. So that's my motivation.
Suggestion. You make a motion. Let's see if we get a second, and then we can vote on it. If people feel that's premature, I'll be guided by that too. But unless I hear that you think it's premature, I would invite a motion for Commissioner Janoff and see if we can get a second.
So I would move to continue the request for the architecture and site application to, with guidance to the developer, to redevelop or redesign the elevations of the building so that it accommodated both single-story and one-story in order to maximize the views of the neighborhood, particularly the views that would be visible along the highway, Highway 17, not the Highway 9.
The north
view.
end of the property?
I think it's the western side of the property. And by doing that, using if you're inclined to stick to the 74,000 square feet you've proposed, that's fine, but make sure that you're doing it in such a fashion that either increases the two-story in one direction and allows for a single-story in another to give the residents more views.
Is there a second? There is a second, Commissioner Birch. Let me ask staff, you've heard the motion. Before we discuss it further and vote on it, is there anything in the motion that the staff would find not clear enough for the staff to have subsequent input on?
I think the discussion this evening is clear, and then it would just depend on what, if anything, the applicant was willing to do in terms of a redesign.
Okay, thank you. All right, Commissioner Hudis.
I just wanted to come back to some of Commissioner Hansen's suggestions, and rather than try to get them third hand, I would invite Commissioner Hansen to weigh in on whether those should also be things considered in a continuance.
There was. Commissioner Birch.
The thing that's troubling me is I too am very, concerned that so many of the residents are really worried about what's happening with this development and the impacts that it'll have on them. And so I kind of did a lot of math over the last few days, and not to make light of the 60,000 number, but we have to come up with some objective sort of standard. And I looked at it in terms of traffic, and I'm like, well, it's pretty much a corresponding percentage, difference. And so if you take the thing down 20%, it's going to go down to like 416 instead of 489 daily trips, and the peak AM trips is going to go down to 80 instead of 104. It's still a lot more than they have now. And so I'm just not sure if that just fixing the view is going to really help, and then to put the applicant through a required redesign. I mean, maybe it ought to be more non-specific about what to do. But I don't know that we can be that non-specific.
If I understood Commissioner Hudis correctly, you had,
And so-
independent of this, had some of your own concerns, and I think we were just trying to explore that.
So I wanted to make that comment as a predecessor to say that I don't know if it makes sense for them to say move the north setback over if they're going to be required to do a redesign to bring the thing down. But if it's open about how they get the view better, then my suggestion would make sense.
I don't understand, what was your suggestion? I missed it.
I basically said, right now, the applicant has added another 30 feet to the north setback, so now it's 56, and I thought that the residents had talked about it being 80 feet. So I thought if it was 80 feet, that would take it a little bit beyond where the furthermost north building is right now. And right now, the view is actually pretty good, with the exception of that big pine tree I was talking about, when you look at that. And so all I'm saying is that if it has to be a redesign, or is there another way that they can improve the view? I'm not trying to leave it vague, but my suggestion to change the north setback is it might be part of the proposal, but if they put it back into two buildings, it's probably not realistic to do that. They're probably going to end up moving more over to closer to the property line. It'd be my guess.
But would you like to add to the motion?
So I could add the other things, but we got feedback that we can't limit the number of employees, but we could limit the number of occupants. But it's based on the fire code anyway, so there's no need to put a condition in for that. Is there a chance that the fire code would allow? They were talking about as low as 75 square feet per employee, which would be 800 or 900 employees. Is there any chance that the fire code would allow that many employees in a building?
That's possible. It just depends on the layout for the specific tenant. So that's handled when the tenant improvements for a specific tenant come through the building plan check process, and then the occupant load has to be provided by the applicant and then is checked by staff to make sure it complies with the building and fire code.
Okay. So then I don't think that it would make sense to add that. I did mention the written agreement to maintain the shuttle for 3 to 5 years. I think that is an outstanding thing that the developer has done. So I know they agreed to it in the terms and conditions, but yes.
I just wanted to call your attention to the new condition of approval that staff did add to the draft conditions for your consideration, which actually does include it in the conditional use permit. So that would continue. If they wanted to stop the shuttle, they would be required to come back to this body to request a modification to their conditional use permit.
Oh, good. So that's covered. Well, I saw it in the terms and conditions, but I wasn't sure if it would actually be in the CUP or not. Okay, right. So that answers that. And then the other thing I had was it's really outstanding that the applicant had offered to make the surface parking available to the residents and also the open space on the north end, assuming that that continues. And I hope that that it would be not just a terms and conditions thing, but there would be some kind of easement that it would be there as different tenants came through and that sort of thing.
So the again, it wasn't specifically an easement, a recorded easement, but it is one of the conditions that is part of the conditional use permit. And the conditional use permit runs with the land, so it doesn't matter which tenant is in there, but that would be one of the conditions that they would have to meet to continue in office use in this location. And any modification to that would require a modification to the conditional use permit.
Okay, so that's covered because it's in the CUP as well. So I think that was pretty much the major items that I had.
Okay, Commissioner Udis?
So I wanted to come back to the motion, and so my understanding is that we're not redesigning the building to be 1-story, 2-story, but we are giving direction, tell me if I got this right, for the applicant to evaluate or explore the possibility of improving the views by going to a 1-story, 2-story solution.
That's not my understanding. Okay. We can go to the maker. My understanding was, and so we'll have two understandings here, you can tell us. I understood you to say you wanted a project having a 1-story element to it and I guess a 2-story element to it. Perhaps I misunderstood what you wanted, and if you could explain it to us?
No, that's correct. If my feeling is, I'm not proposing that we dictate the size of this 1-story or 2-story, but I am concerned that if we only suggest there might be a 1-story, 2-story, we'll get back the same kind of blocky structure, maybe shifted on the property a little bit, but it doesn't do much in general.
You did say the 1-story would be so arranged as to improve the view. That is to say, I keep throwing out north, but I think it's the north side of the property, which open up the west side. Yes. Right. That. So, in other words, if they came with a 1-story on the other side of the property, that's not what you're asking for.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
Okay,
Commissioner Udis?
A question for Commissioner Janoff. Do we have any evidence that's been presented to us that suggests that they can accomplish a 1-story, 2-story solution in the range of square footage that we're talking about, roughly 74,000?
I don't have my ruler out, but looking at drawing A1.00, I'm looking at the footprint from the originally proposed 91 or 93,000 square foot project. That building was, I don't know whether that's the 44 or the 47,000 square foot project, but that's the substantial area where I believe a 2-story building could be constructed. And it does what Commissioner Hanson suggests, and that's pulling the building out closer to Alberta Way. However much or little of what would now be the top part of the L becomes 1-story or remains 2-story would be a question for the developer. But the point is that any modification to, as Commissioner O'Donnell refers to, the north end of the proposed building, any modification of that brings any portion of that to a single story would help preserve the view. So my recommendation is for them to consider how they can achieve the square footage, not necessarily what proportion two-story, one-story.
So, I mean, I'm okay with recommendation to consider, but I'm concerned about a mandate to do this because I don't think there's actually evidence that it could be accomplished. And I actually believe we had testimony earlier that said that anytime you move the building closer to Alberta Way, you decrease the views. You obstruct the views of those hillsides. So I'm okay with, consider and explore. I don't think we have evidence that would allow me to support a motion that says it's a mandate to do a one-story, two-story. That's just.
Well, these, in a sense, are never mandates. When you send it back and say, I'd like you to try to do this, that's really all you're saying. I'd like you to try to do this. Now, they can come back and say, we've done 6 drawings, and you can't do it because, here, let me show you. And if they do that, then they could convince us that it doesn't work.
So if that's the motion, then I'm okay with it.
That was my understanding.
Right.
Is that correct, Commissioner Janoff? Yeah, so if it wasn't worded correctly, we should make sure that it is worded as Commissioner Huda's wishes and as I think I've just said.
So I would propose a couple other things to consider in that vein. One is whether Commissioner Hansen's suggestion to move the north setback would improve views as well. I mean, we said that might be an or another option to improve views. And the other item is actually coming back to something that's an old idea that came up. There was actually quite a bit of testimony from residents that a dog park wasn't necessarily the best use. And so I was, again, suggesting that while it be publicly accessible open space, that the applicant explore potentially other uses for that space that might be more attractive to the neighbors.
Let me again say, because I'm trying to understand this as we're going along too. I understand Commissioner Janoff wanting the view, but I also understand to say the architectural look would be improved by the single story and the two-story as opposed to the whole thing being 2 stories. So we're really dealing with 2 things. One would be we really want to improve the view there. And that could either be done by what you're suggesting now, or it could be done by this 1 story. It may be that 1 story will not improve the view enough, but the suggestion you're making may, or none of it's going to improve it enough, but improve it greatly. So you could put both things. In other words, I understand the motion simply to be, let's see what we could do with a 1-story, 2-story, making the 2-story bigger than it presently is, to try to get to the square footage the applicant wants. But also, what we've heard is if we could expand the open space, that would be a big help too, and they should look at that.
Well, I was referring to the use.
dog park.
Right. Not to expand it, but to
No,
allocate
for
it to
different
potentially
use.
a different use that the residents would prefer.
Right, well, yes, fine. So will the maker of the motion incorporate those 2 suggestions?
Yes.
And will the seconder?
Yes.
All right, I'm going to call, unless there's further.
There is.
Okay, go right ahead.
I feel like we're going down a very dangerous path. I'm very concerned about the precedent of ignoring so much passion in the town code, in the general plan, commercial design guidelines, only to hit a consistency to what? I don't even know what. But there's so much language in here, and there's so much passion in our letters, and we're supposed to be input from surrounding residents is a major consideration during any development review, and we're playing numbers games. And we've been played numbers games from 96,000 to 84,000 to 72,000. I'm really distressed, and I'm sure that's not clear, but I'd like to make it clear that we are ignoring provisions we have to protect and preserve the town, which we are in danger of giving away. And I'm not going to support the motion unless we give guidance to further reduce the project and make it consistent with the guidelines we have, and especially listening to the neighbors. Everything we have is similar to what was there. Preserve and protect. We have 31,000 square feet there. The initial design was 94,000. I don't think they read a word. then we got it down to 74, and then we got it down further, and council suggested there might be another level, and we're giving that away. And we're giving this language away, which we are going to need again in the future. So
All right,
that's
we
my
call
2
the
cents.
question. All those in favor of the motion say aye. Commissioner Hanson, you're not voting on it?
I'm voting against.
Against it, okay. So those opposed? So we have 4 for and 2 opposed. All right, so it'll be continued to a date certain. The date is?
Yeah, so we would like to add to the motion, if it's okay with the maker of the motion and the seconder, to a date certain of February 28th, if I can read that far. February 28th, so approximately 6 weeks. Should the applicant choose to not make any changes, and that will come back then. The only other option they would have would be to pay for additional noticing for a new public hearing, and so we will make sure they understand those options. But if it's okay with the maker and the seconder, to February 28th, and then we would need consensus from the commission.
Yes,
So it's continued to February 28th. Thank you.
thank you. We'll take a 5-minute break now. Okay, we'll come back in session. We are now on item number 3, which is 400 Carlton Avenue. I'll ask for a staff report.
Thank you.
Mr. Mullen, please.
Thank you. For your consideration this evening is a request for demolition of 2 existing single-story office buildings and construction of a new 2-story office building on property zoned office. The subject property is located on the southeast corner of Carlton Avenue and Joe Drive. The site is adjacent to office, single-family, and 2-family uses. And the applicant proposes a 7,996 square foot 2-story medical office building with 16 below-grade parking spaces and 16 at-grade parking spaces. Medical office space is proposed on both the ground and second floors. The proposed project would meet required setbacks, lot coverage, and height requirements for the zone. The proposed project would meet the parking requirements as well of the town code and would require payment of traffic impact fees related to an increase in peak trips associated with the additional square footage pursuant to the town policy. The applicant proposes removal of 7 protected trees, requiring that 21 trees be planted to mitigate this removal. The applicant proposes to offset the tree removal by planting 6 new trees on site and payment of in lieu fees for the other removal. Since the release of the staff report, no additional public comments have been received. Staff recommends that the Planning Commission make the findings included in Attachment 2 of the staff report and approve the architecture and site application subject to the conditions of approval included as Attachment 3 and the development plans. This concludes staff's presentation. We are happy to answer any questions.
Okay, before we check to see if there are any questions, I guess I should say we welcome Commissioner Badami back. Unfortunately, we've lost another commissioner. Commissioner Birch had some overriding considerations she had to attend to, so she will not be joining us. I also failed to say what the nature of what we're doing is, and I should say this. The request is for the demolition of 2 existing medical office buildings, construction of a new 2-story medical building below grade, which I think you've just said, and then I'd like to see a show of hands of those commissioners who went out and looked at the property. So we all did. Okay. Now, are there any questions of staff? Vice Chair Kane.
In the applicant's proposal, and maybe it's in front of me, but I didn't see it, when they do this new project, will it extend to the street? Will it include the sidewalks?
The building would meet required setbacks, if that's what you're asking.
No.
Are you
I
asking
wanna
if they
know
would make improvements?
If they're going to do those sidewalks.
I don't believe that they would be replacing the sidewalk, as sheet A3 indicates existing sidewalks.
Excuse me if I could interrupt, Sean?
Yes, please.
Kevin Bagley, Engineering. One of the conditions for approval would be repairing and replacing the sidewalk in between the 2 driveways.
I didn't see it in writing. So let's say the driveways are on the east side. And, yes?
So on the Joe Drive side?
The shared driveway, where they're going to have...
There are 2 shared driveways. So
Right.
there's one on Joe, and then there's another one on Carlton.
Okay, so what is the other street? Joe Street, Mary Joe Street? I walked the property twice, and I like the design, I like everything about it, but they've got a lot of trees growing, and what they do is shave sidewalks to prevent people from dying, and I died anyway. So they don't need to shave them again, they need to replace them. It's going to be a lovely building, and they should have lovely sidewalks, and if it's okay, we should make that a condition, that they do all the sidewalks all around, because they're in bad shape. The existing building is in
Is this a
bad shape.
question? Wait a minute, is this a question?
Can we make that a stipulation or a condition?
Why don't we get to the meat of the matter, and you can certainly suggest we put that as a condition.
Not if it's already in there. That's what I wanted to know. And
Well,
it's
then
not.
ask the question, is it already in there?
It is.
Okay, there you go, got an answer. Okay, Commissioner Hudis.
Thank you for the report. I wonder if you could clarify the parking requirements. I believe there's a square footage, and there's also a number of doctors requirement or something that I read about. And I hadn't come across one of those before.
So that's correct. For medical, if someone came in with a use and occupancy application for a medical practice, we would look at the square footage of the practice. We'd also ask them questions about their operational characteristics, including the number of doctors that would be practicing out of that space. And then we would do an analysis to see which parking requirement would be more restrictive based on the number of doctors, so 6 spaces per doctor, or the square footage, and we would apply that that requirement to their use and occupancy. In this case, we are looking at a building that is set up to be medical office, at least on the second floor. It's clear based on their floor plan. So the staff report recognizes that there is a square footage requirement which we're applying because we don't know exactly how many doctors would be allowed to practice at this time because we don't know what would be proposed downstairs as well. But we're applying the square footage and making reference to if this were to be all medical, the maximum number of doctors based on the parking would be six. I believe it's six. Five.
Okay. Because I was looking at the existing building, which is quite a bit smaller, and I was challenged by the number of doctors and when that criteria is used, because I counted 8 doors that had a doctor's name on it, plus another door that said office suite. So, and I didn't know if you count multiple doctors per suite and all that kind of thing. So you've clarified you're using square footage, and so the number of parking spaces required is how many?
32.
32, okay. And the existing has 16?
I believe 16 is correct.
Yeah, although one of them isn't really a space,
May
it's
not meet
about half
standard.
a space. So, but so the 32 is adequate for however the town calculates
For the square footage, and if a tenant were to move in and take over the full building and have it as a medical practice or multiple medical practices, they would be limited to 5 doctors based on the required 6 spaces per doctor.
Which I think that could be a challenge. So how would that get handled? Because, like I said, the existing building, which is smaller, has 8.
Well, I'll go ahead and jump in. So we don't know the particulars of the existing building, but what we do have in a number of our medical buildings is many doctors don't work 5 days a week. And so sometimes they're not all there at the same time. The other challenge you have with this building is it was built quite some time ago. So the requirements at that time may have been different. And so we don't punish them moving forward. We just try to make sure they comply with our current standards if they do that. But we have a number of locations throughout town where we have multiple doctors, but some of them they're only there a couple days a week, a few hours a day. It depends on the particular practice. But this will be a requirement moving forward if this new building is approved as we evaluate the business licenses for individual doctors who might come through.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? If not, I have 3 cards, 2 of whom I assume are for the applicant, and the third, I'm not sure. So I'm going to take them in the order of the applicant. Gary Kolstad will go first unless you have some other desire. All right, so that's Dr. Tom Eduardo. Let me stop you. I should have been clearer. Could you give us an address, either your business address or your home address?
My business address currently is in Los Gatos at 15100 Los Gatos Boulevard, and my home address is 1604 Main Lane in Santa Fe.
All right, thank you. Yeah, it wasn't very loud, though.
Okay, again, thank you again for your time.
We're having trouble hearing you. Is the mic on?
No, I don't think so.
Sean, can you share your mic?
We should probably start over.
We will, yeah.
Batteries
Thank you. Again, thank you, Commissioners, for having me here
We're starting
tonight.
your time again, so you're not going to be penalized.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, residents of Los Gatos, for coming to listen. I put up 2 pictures of what we're starting with here on the left-hand side and what our proposal is on the right. And I put a picture of my family up here because this property, or this project, is owned by T&M Properties, which is myself and my wife and my daughters and our lab, who she's good and she's bad. But really, I've come to the conclusion after many years of practice that why go and develop a property and be an occupant, and really the majority of the leasable space in this area, or in the area of Good Samaritan Hospital, is somewhat old and dilapidated. That hospital was built in the 50s and was done by Silker, and most of those facilities are aging and being replaced, including this one, which was built just right after I was born. The state-of-the-art facility is necessary in this area to meet the needs of the aging population and to keep up with the codes for medical, for the handicap parking, for the access, the inflow and the e-flow of the building. I'm in a building right now that doesn't really have a great system for my particular specialty, which is podiatric medicine. So the changes in healthcare are such that doctors are starting to work together in small groups. We already have 3 doctors in our office. We're hoping to expand to possibly 1 more. But the current environment for physicians is to collaborate together and work together in small groups. You won't see that many people just hanging a shingle and being a single doctor anymore. The development at the Carlton address is designed to meet the needs of this community, and I'm here to provide that resource for you. So earlier this summer, I went out on a community outreach and visited with some of the neighbors. I'm sorry if any of those neighbors are here and I didn't meet with you. I tried to hit the immediate area, and including the commercial neighbor behind me. There's an Alzheimer care facility there, and then the other medical neighbor just behind me. We do share an easement, so I wanted to make sure that they were aware of the project, and they have been. So when I went around and talked to the neighbors, there were several main concerns, the usual, which is traffic, parking, and some safety issues on the underground structure, as well as noise during construction. The traffic impact formulation that was put together by the town showed a significant increase in traffic. Currently, there are 8 tenants in there. They're seeing close to 20 patients a day, average probably of 140, 160 visits to the building daily. The current size is 3,200 square feet and is 100% occupied. There are no easements or breezeways that are used in that common formula. The proposed size for the building, even though the total square footage is 7,900, is really 6,832 because that includes the elevator spaces and the stairwell. So there's really just a slightly a little bit more than double the current size. In our office, there are 3 full-time, 1 part-time doctor, and I took about 75 weeks of data from my office to get an average daily number of patients that come through my office, and we came out with 45.1 on a 5-day work week. There's significant reduction in traffic to this building overall with this plan. The formula for determining traffic in this particular situation is somewhat flawed for my proposed project, and I heard someone say it earlier, that's right, there's 8 people in there now. There won't be 8 people in there when this is complete. This building is for our office, and it's an owner-occupied use. So parking concerns underground. As we said, there are 32 spots, which meets the standard for 5 physicians. The underground parking, again, trying to get to some of the concerns of the neighborhood, will be gated and it will be well lit. The lighting for the exterior, and I'll let Gary Colsat, my architect, talk about that, will be down and will be not shining too much light on the neighbors in the surrounding area. So the facility will be completely secure. So in summary, I believe the project fits in what's best for this particular community. It meets the building standards, and I've tried to consider, as well as my architect, the surrounding neighbors and how that would impact the community. So I'm going to just give Gary a few minutes to speak about the building itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. And we have another PowerPoint. Hopefully it works tonight. Gary Colsat, architect, and together with our team of Hannah Bernetti, David Fox, architects, and someone else. I know that there's another good portion on our team. We've come together and put together this project. This building is in an office zone. It is an office. We are not asking for any exceptions at all. We're below the height limit. We're below the coverage of the 40% max. We're at 31%. So we're below all those things. It's surrounded by offices, and it's along the National Avenue corridor, which is a well-known doctor's office street. So it's another excellent addition to this neighborhood. And it's also surrounded by many 2-story homes across the street. All 4 of the homes are 2-story, And then up on Joe, there's two stories past the corner, which is multifamily. Wanted to talk a little bit about circulation. We're using the existing ingress, egress locations. And so there's going to be no change in habit over, this has been like this since 1967. And we chose to enter and exit the underground parking from the common shared driveway instead of going onto Joe. And that, again, tries to respect the neighbors on Joe. It's well landscaped. The trees that we are removing are olive trees. They're only protected when they're 18 inches or larger, and we have 2 that are larger than 18. They are all in the back of the property except for 2 or 3 in the front, which are in the way of the building. We're going to re-landscape this building. It's going to look beautiful. We also have the luxury of this street has so many parking strip trees, all the liquid ambers, which do a number on the sidewalks, of course, but they do help screen the building. And so that the 2-story is not going to be that noticeable. The architecture was designed to not only read as an office building and a medical office building at that, but also to have a touch of residential character to it, to talk to the neighbors, the residential neighbors, that is. We just did some renderings based on the exact angles of these photographs. These are the story poles you see, and this is looking west coming from National, and that's the rendering of that with the trees kind of clouded in there. This is an angle looking at the corner of the building. You can see the story poles up above the trees, and those trees remain. And you can see that's the structure, and we have not shown olive trees in there, so you can see the building. This is just one more angle taken from Joe and the side entrance, and that's the side there. And what we've done in addition to having what we did is we took off this whole corner of the building to reduce the mass that much more to respect the 1-story neighbors on Joe Drive. So that's it with that, and I just want to conclude by again reiterating that we're not asking for anything special. We meet all the parking requirements. We meet the architectural consultant liked the building after a few of our changes, and I think that the fact that this is an owner-occupied building speaks well to the future of this building. Right now, Dr. Lauder has owned this building for, 2 years now? He's out there every weekend. I happen to live about a mile from here, and I drive by quite a bit. I see him every weekend out there fixing something, cleaning something up, and so I know he's going to be there every day, and he's going to be a great member to the community. And I think that you should welcome this building. And we're here to answer any questions. Our civil engineer is here as well if you have any questions.
Thank you. Are there questions? Commissioner Hudes.
I had 2 questions about architecture. One was the column width in the back. The consulting architect suggested making them wider. I believe the response was that you couldn't do that. Are you satisfied with what's come back, and is the consulting architect satisfied with the resolution on the columns in the back?
Yes. Let me walk over here. I don't have a pointer, right? There's no pointer on this, is there? Oh, okay. So these are the columns that support the 2nd story, and they're 20 feet apart. And they're like a normal parking structure. They're every other parking space. They fit in there, and they're 12 inches wide. He wanted them like 18 inches wide, and if you added 6 inches to each column, we would actually lose a parking space. So it's quite a major thing to do. What we did is we lowered the opening, the header opening. We lowered that down. We added this arbor here. And we also added this detail on the columns. We looked at doing arches, but they get so flat The proportions didn't look correct. So we think that this is going to look just fine.
I have a second question on architecture. So this one's a broader question on commercial compatibility. So this area has been a medical office area, and if anything, this whole area is growing and it's becoming more intensive and more concentrated in terms of medical office. And when I look at what's there, there's a jumble of style of architecture. So with this building, is there any kind of improvement in terms of consistency and sense of place that this is a medical area and that this building is consistent with other buildings that are coming in rather than the ones that are going out?
I think if you're all aware of the building that's on the corner of Good Samaritan Drive and Los Gatos Boulevard. It was completed about 2 years ago. You see several other buildings done in town that have this style. And these buildings are built to last. They're quality materials, long-standing roofs. And if you look at the buildings in our area, in this particular area of Carlton and National, they are aging a little bit. But we're not going to, as an architect, I don't see a lot of desirability of those structures, and I certainly don't want to mimic them. I want to do something that's quality design, and I think we've done that, and I think that it also has a statement. If we did something that looked completely residential, I mean, someone's going to drive by and go, "Where's the doctor's office?" I'm looking for a doctor's office, not a condo. There are apartments across the street at National and Carlton that look like apartment buildings. We certainly don't want to do that. And we don't want it to look, no offense to the Alberta Way building, but we don't want it to look commercial like that as well. So.
Thank you. Other questions? Vice Chair Kane?
The doctor said you reached out to residents. Did you speak with the 3 or 4 on Carlton that are facing you?
We spoke with 3 of the 4. One would never answer inquiries or anything like that.
How about the ones on Joe? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Excuse
Okay.
me.
Well.
Let me stop you for 1 second.
Gotta wait.
We're recording everything, and so if you want to come up after and speak, you can, but not from the audience. Thank you.
I'm going to let Dr. Alaudo answer those questions, because he's the one who did the community outreach.
Yes, in fact, straight across the street, there's a new owner over there, and I met him again this weekend for the first time. But the one that's directly across the street doesn't answer the door. 2 over, they have dogs, because I've been to their houses many times, but they don't answer. So, I'm out there, like Gary said, almost every weekend. I drive by every morning, and I drive by every day on the way home from work. The first house on the corner from Joe is a duplex. Those are renters. I went 1 block up on that side and actually met those folks there, too. Don't know their names offhand, but going down Joe, some people just, I spoke with one lady for an hour and a half. Some people don't, some people just said, no thank you, and shut the door. And so I think it was a mixed bag, but the feedback that we did get, and I don't know if that's been presented in a format with names and whatnot, but hopefully you all received that, and if you don't, I have that. And again, I apologize to the folks that I have not met.
I just had a question. Have you contacted the 4 across the street on Carlton and the 3 on Joe, and did you get any objections?
The only objection from the one lady was the concern about the underground safety for the parking.
Okay.
That was it. The gentleman I
you.
met this weekend had no concerns, and he's a new owner.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions? Thank you very much. I guess you still have some more time, is that right? No, the time's exhausted, so, okay. I'll entertain yours in just a moment. I have a card here from Janice Carter. Ms. Carter, you can pull that microphone down.
Sure.
Thank you.
I'm short. My name's Janice Carter. I live directly across the street from the medical office on Joe Drive. If you go out my driveway you'd go directly into that driveway, which those people often do come into my driveway. I've lived there since 1984, and I've seen this area just get more and more and more congested. So I am concerned about the traffic. I'm concerned about the noise, because right now you can't, if you're a resident, you cannot park on Joe Drive because it's all medical office. I was told once by an employee that they had to park on Joe Drive because they weren't allowed to park in the parking lot. And that brings along car alarms going off every day. So I am concerned. I have never met the doctor, but I did meet with his nurse, and I did give a sheet to them with my concerns, which was more than just the underground parking safety. It was the whole scale and look of this. It's a big Mediterranean beige building in a residential area. And I think, you know, the new medical buildings on Los Gatos Boulevard are in this style, and that's great for Los Gatos Boulevard. But this is basically a residential area, and this is what I look out onto. The other thing I would certainly prefer is, I'm glad to hear that they're going to have underground parking, because it might help. I can't get deliveries. My gardeners have trouble. The parking is really bad on Joe Drive. But I think I've lost my train of thought. It's just to the scale of it. They're going to be doubling. Now, it sounds like maybe they might have less doctors, but they're almost doubling the capacity, and the traffic and parking is just really bad already. So those are my concerns.
All right, thank you. Let's see if there are some questions. Are there questions? Commissioner Badami?
How long have you lived there for?
34 years.
When you purchased your property, was this property across the street zoned for office?
It was the exact building that's there now.
Okay, but you lived in your property knowing that you bought property right next to
Yes.
property zoned for office?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes,
thank you.
but it's the intensity of traffic has increased over the 34 years by a lot.
It's increased everywhere in town, I can tell you.
Any other questions?
Commissioner Hudes?
Yeah, I understand the challenge of living in a neighborhood where the traffic is increasing and the parking is more difficult. We have to focus on testimony and evidence that's given to us here. And what was presented is that this building will have twice as many parking spaces and fewer doctors. I can go back and challenge that, but given those facts, is there any reason to think that this will really increase the traffic or the parking issue, given that there is double the parking and fewer doctors that are proposed?
Well, they say they're doubling the parking, but there's already no parking on Joe or on Carlton and in the parking lot. So even if they double the parking, I don't think that's going to alleviate much, especially if it's a bigger building.
So you're saying the existing parking doesn't fit the existing building?
Right.
Either a lot of people are parking
Not at
there?
all.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, so I have one other card. Mr. Serrano?
Thank you for the time. I was not prepared. I didn't know how this works, so I appreciate the time. I'm Jose Serrano. I'm actually the neighbor in the Carlton Avenue, right in front of this property. As far as I remember, the post went up on December 16, right before the holidays. I approached the people putting the post to ask what it meant. I sent an email to the city showing how the construction would actually obstruct the view of the mountains that are right behind the construction from my property. I wrote to the city asking how the process works. Somebody, I have the emails here. I can show them to you. I even sent a picture of the of the structure and the property and so forth. I was informed that the city was going to be on vacation until January. This was around December 22nd. January 2nd, you were open for business. I was out on a vacation trip until last night, and today I left the office just to come here and understand how this works, right? So I guess my first petition will be to ask for more time to consult an attorney and understand how this works and see what rights do I have. I'm a lawyer myself, but I'm an in-house counsel. I'm not familiar with any of this. I'm coming here more than anything else as a neighbor. I've seen the traffic in the street. I moved to the street 2 years ago. The traffic keeps increasing to a point that is dangerous even for the kids to play outside. I've heard the same story that the lady just explained about the doctors asking their personnel to park in the street, pretty much right in front of my house, because they don't have enough parking space in the buildings, right? I don't know how this will affect, or I'm not an expert in these situations, but I can tell you what I can see. Just to leave the driveway of my house to get into Carlton is dangerous. You cannot even see the cars coming through, and the traffic, as I have mentioned before, is extremely high. So I have concerns about the view, I have concerns about the traffic, I have concerns about the parking situation that currently exists in the area, and of course, as a neighbor, I have a concern about the value of the residences that are there. This is not just an office space. This area also has some residential homes, right? And I think that we need to think about that. I've seen Nation, I think is the name of the street, increasingly becoming an office space, but there are people living in Carlton in residences. So if we only look for the interest of the business, I don't know who is going to be looking for the interest of the residents living there.
Just for the record, I have your address here, and see if it's correct. 331 Carlton?
331 Carlton Avenue.
Okay, so are there questions? Commissioner Hanson.
Thank you for your testimony. I was just curious, is your house a one-story or a two-story house?
My house is a two-story house, right? Yeah.
Okay. And so right now you're able to look over the
the building is pretty low, and I can show some pictures if you want. The angles that they showed are different, are from the sides, right? Are from the corners looking into the property. If you ask for anybody in front of the property, they are raising like 2 stories, I believe, plus it has like an arch at the top, like a corner at the top. It obstructs any views that you can have from the house to the mountains that are right behind. When you see the advertising of the house that I purchased 2 years ago, one of the things that are advertised is mountain views. That's one of the things that gives value to those properties.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Hudes?
Yeah, thank you. I'm not that familiar with the views issue here, but I did want to sort of ask you the same question about the parking situation. I understand there are many areas in town where traffic is getting worse and parking is becoming even more of a problem. We've been presented with some testimony tonight that the parking would be doubled, going from 16 spaces to 32 spaces, and that the number of doctors would be decreased and the number of visits per day would be significantly decreased. Are there other things that we should consider about that maybe we've missed in terms of why you think that this would increase the traffic to the current situation?
I mean, if you see a building going from one story to 2, you just assume that there is going to be more people coming to that space. That's why they need the extra space, right? I'm not an expert, I'm just a resident, right? I'm sure that you have in the city the right experts, but if you see a bigger building going on, you can just assume that there's going to be more density.
I will ask some follow-up questions about that, but my observation is that this building is broken into 8 separate, very small offices where there are quite a few people conducting business, currently, just from walking around. It just is, it contradicts what the logic seems to be, that adding parking and decreasing the number of doctors would result in...
Right, and that's why I'm suggesting that probably we should have some more time to just get legal counsel and be able to answer this question, because I'm not an expert on this. What I can tell you is most of the people that you see parking early in the morning, first, are not patients. It's not people coming in and out. Most of them are wearing medical uniforms, and they stay there for the whole day. And I'm sure probably they know better who they are, right, than me, right? So I don't know how much that will change with the construction. They may have just one doctor in the office, but they may have more nurses and medical staff than they currently have occupying the space now. I just don't know it.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, sir, thank you very much.
Thank you for the time.
All right, we'll go back to the applicant, Gary Kolstad.
Thank you. It's interesting to hear that. And I think that the comment that Mr. Serrano made at the end, that the people that park on the street, on Carlton and on Joe, I've seen this myself as well, that they're all wearing smocks and they're all bringing their lunches. And none of those people work in the existing building. Because the existing building is all psychiatrists and counselors and family practitioners like that. They're going to the surgical center across the street, or they're going to the building on the corner. They're not coming, so what we're doing is not going to change that parking situation on the street. Just want to, that's, I don't have any facts to I don't have any data to back that up. I just have personal observation and their witnesses as well. And it is in a traffic zone, but that's where offices should be. And again, I think that we've reduced the height of this building as much as we can to still keep it a very high level, high quality office building. It's only a couple feet taller than a residence would be. So we're really scaled down. So I think we've done as much as we can to make this building be a good bridge, if you will, from the residential to the other offices that are dominant on National.
Vice Chair Kane?
Will the people who work in the building be allowed to park in their parking spots?
That's what they're for.
All right, someone else said that the folks there now or somebody else are not allowed to park by their own facility. They've got to park somewhere else. You're saying, no, that's not the case for this building.
That won't be the case for this building.
Okay.
Although they are allowed to park on the street. However, they're not going to be made to be parked on the street. Does that make sense?
I would imagine the doctors will have name tags on their spots. Will other employees have name tags, or will they just be encouraged to park at the facility?
The way the facility is designed, there will be 16 on the top deck. That will be mostly for patients coming and going. Underneath will be mostly for the employees and the doctors that are there. And currently there's 7 employees and 3 doctors, so there's 10 spots. So there will be extra parking underneath the garage as well for patients. And because we're all surgeons, there's always 1 doctor less in the office any single day because they're usually in surgery. So with the 3 doctors that are there, we each have a surgical day, and it alternates. So there should be plenty of parking for this.
I'm just going through the lady's comment that employees were not allowed to park at the building. So your employees are allowed to park at your building?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Currently or in the future?
This building.
The new building?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Assuming Carlton is east-west, behind the building, off of Carlton, the parking spots that look like they're on your property are dedicated to 15215. Will that be the case in the future?
That is correct. That easement separates those 2 properties. The owner on the corner behind me, they share the easement, but they own those spots on that side, and we own our spots on this side, up against the building.
And Mr. Kolstad, it's my fault I didn't understand staff's answer. Will you be putting in new sidewalks?
We will replace sidewalks that need to be repaired. The town's arborist was against it, because he felt that it was going to harm the trees. But we will repair any sidewalk that needs to be repaired.
You know what I'm getting at. The trees are putting the sidewalk up,
Right.
and you can see where they've been shaved to make them flatter again, and right now they're not flatter again. So I'm wondering, are you going to shave them or replace them?
We're going to do whatever the engineering department makes us do to meet their standards.
Thank you.
There's a certain amount of shaving you can do before it becomes the point where you have to replace them. And then when you do that, you have to actually cut the roots of the trees, which is why the arborist doesn't like it.
Right. Thank you.
Other questions? I have a question, and that, would you have any problem with a condition being added that you will encourage, because I don't think you can require, you will encourage your employees to park in the building's parking? Some of the neighbors are complaining about parking and that kind of thing. And I think it would at least be a show of your good faith, which you've already said.
I have no problem with that.
Okay, so if we can draft something, it's not a requirement, because I don't think we can do that, but you will encourage your employees to park on-site. Thank you very much. Commissioner Hanson.
I was just curious relative to the comment about the view, what is the height differential between the current building and the proposed building? I know it's a 1-story versus a 2-story, but what is the height differential?
We don't know what the current building is. I would estimate it to be 14, 15 feet tall, and we're going 31 feet.
Okay,
The
so
trees are, got to be 35 feet tall. So when they're leafed out, you can't see through those trees. So they're going to block, they're going to be as tall as the height of our building.
So it's your opinion that the trees are as much of an impact to the residents' view than as the building would be, or more?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Any other questions? If not, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to close the public input to the public hearing, and I will ask the commission if they have any comments, questions, or a motion. Commissioner Badami.
I find this to be a well-designed building. There's no exceptions. The issues raised by the town architect have been resolved. I don't see that there's going to be a parking issue with the conversation that we've had with the applicant. And the logic as brought up by Commissioner Hudes. So I would be in favor of approving the application with the 2 conditions that we encourage the employees to park on site and that we review the repair and replacement of the sidewalks with the town arborist and Ms. Peterson.
So do you want to make
Well,
the motion?
I could make the motion. I don't want to be greedy on that one because it may be that my fellow commissioners would like to provide input, but if nobody's
Why don't
looking
you
at me
go
like
ahead
they
and
would,
the
I'll make a motion.
If we get a second, then we can discuss it to our heart's content.
All right. I move to approve architecture and site application S-17-002, requesting approval for demolition of an existing medical office building and construction of a new 2-story medical building with below-grade and at-grade parking on properties zoned office. I can make the required findings for CEQA. I can make the required findings for demolition of existing structures. I can make the finding that it's consistent with applicable provisions of the commercial design guidelines. And I would add the 2 conditions that we encourage the employees to park on site and again, review the repair and replacement of the sidewalks with the town arborist and Ms. Peterson.
Is there a second? Vice Chair Kane?
I'll second the motion. And a question to the maker of the motion. On the recommendations we have on page 7, 8 of the staff report, they need us to make required considerations for the A&S. Item 4 and item 5 is approval of the A&S. Was that in your motion?
Well, I did make that consideration, but I was making my findings. I will add that as part of my motion, but obviously I did make those considerations, but I'll add it to wording if it makes you feel better. So yes, this was in consideration of architecture and site application pursuant to section 29.20.150 of the town code.
All right, so we have a motion and a second. Is there any, Commissioner Hudes?
Just a question for staff. Did the public testimony raise any concerns about notification process of the neighbors? And was there any concern that correspondence provided wasn't fully considered?
We followed the standard 300-foot radius notification process that we use to owners and occupants of the residences and office buildings in that area. Additionally, during review of the A&S application, we work closely with the applicant to ask them to provide us a summary of their outreach efforts. There's no way to hold their feet to the fire, so to speak, but the applicant did provide something in attachment 10 that shows their efforts to do some outreach to the neighbors.
And you have story polls, is it?
As well as story polls and project signage, you're correct.
Okay, was there correspondence on views provided that wasn't part of our packet, or did I miss it?
No, I received one email two emails, I'm sorry, that are included with the staff report in attachment 13. One was, at least one of them was supportive, and the other one was from Mr. Serrano, who spoke this evening and corresponded with him. His correspondence started with the building department's permit technicians before they realized that it was an architecture and site application before the Christmas holiday.
Commissioner Badami?
For you as well. How long was the netting and the sign posted in advance of tonight's hearing?
Staff approved the survey of the netting on December 21st, but I believe it was installed several days before that. Then the applicant needs to get a surveyor out there to verify that the netting's at the appropriate height. So the approval date, what we would say, where we start our timeline is December 21st.
And that would be the sign as well being posted on the property?
Correct.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? If not, I'll call the question. All those in favor of the motion? It passes unanimously. Chair, pardon me, if you would give us the standard words.
Yes, thank you. So anyone who's not satisfied with the decision of the Planning Commission can appeal that decision to the Town Council. Forms are available in the clerk's office. Appeal must be filed within 10 days, and there is a fee for filing the appeal.
Thank you. All right, if everybody is prepared to move forward, we can. We can move to the next item, which is architecture and site approval and variance application for property located at 418 University Avenue, requesting approval of variance for construction of an accessory structure that does meet setback requirements and approval for construction of an addition to a single-family residence that will exceed the allowable floor area ratio on property zone R1D. May we have a staff report?
Good evening, Chair and Commissioners. The project proposes an addition to a pre-1941 single-family residence and construction of a new detached garage with reduced setbacks. The project was considered by the Historic Preservation Committee on May 24th of 2017, where the committee recommended approval of the project with two modifications, one of which was to match new siding elements to the existing, which the applicant has incorporated into the plans, and the second was an option to modify the rear sliding doors to include window details elsewhere on the home, which the applicant has chosen not to incorporate into the plans. The applicant has requested an architecture and site application to exceed the allowable floor area ratio for an addition to the first floor and a new second story. The proposed home at 2,301 square feet would exceed the allowable floor area ratio by 408 square feet. The proposal would result in the fourth largest home in the immediate neighborhood with regards to square footage and the largest with regards to FAR. The applicant has provided justification for the exception, which can be found in Exhibits 4 and 7, and include justification that two homes in the immediate neighborhood also exceed their allowable FAR. The applicant has also requested a variance application to project into the required right side and rear yard setbacks to accommodate a detached garage. The new 446 square foot detached garage proposes a 1 foot setback along the rear and right side yards. The applicant's justification for the variance cites safety concerns with the proximity of the property to the University Avenue and Los Gatos Saratoga Road intersection, as well as justification for the siting of the structure based on the existing driveway alignment and location of the home. The applicants have reached out to their neighbors, and staff has received 3 letters of support and 1 letter of concern regarding the setbacks of the garage, which are all contained in the desk item before you this evening. Staff recommends that the Planning Commission review the findings and considerations in Exhibit 2 and consider approving the architecture and site application subject to the conditions of approval in Exhibit 3. Staff also recommends denial of the variance application based on concerns related to neighborhood compatibility of the garage setbacks and the fact that the findings to support the variance cannot be made. This completes staff's presentation, but we are happy to assist with any questions.
Ms. Schupman, I'm not familiar with Associate Planner Ms. Schupman. Are congratulations in order?
Thank you.
Congratulations. I went to the property, and certainly there seems to be a challenge with the oncoming traffic. What was the issue with the proposed alternative that you gave, which would not require the variance?
The alternative would be the minimum of a 3-foot setback. So the code does allow a 3-foot setback, and so that would mean the applicant would have to push the garage 2 feet forward and 2 feet in on that right side setback.
Shall I ask the applicant later what the problem is with that? All right,
Sure.
thank you.
I had a related question to that. It said here in the staff report, a detached garage with a 3-foot right side your rear yard setbacks could be constructed with a similar layout that would allow for additional cars to be parked on site. So it would still be you see a scenario that would meet the setbacks that would still be a 2-car garage.
So part of the applicant's letter of justification was discussing being able to get more cars on the property and not parked on University Avenue. And so in staff's looking at the application, the garage could be moved forward 2 feet and in 2 feet and still allow additional cars to be parked on site. Other modifications could be done, including reducing the size of the garage. But the applicant can talk more about the scenario of how they got to this point and why it meets their needs during their presentation.
And I would just add that this is not a 2-car garage. It does not meet the minimum standards for a 2-car garage for town code.
Oh, that's right. You said it wasn't wide enough. Okay. All right.
We have an awesome presentation.
Unfortunately, your time has expired.
Ms. Shootman, try closing the computer and then opening it back up and re-logging in.
You're underpaid. Way underpaid.
Okay. Good evening, Commissioners. Beth Sorsama, Studio 3, representing Cynthia and Tim, my clients. They're here in the audience. I'm going to actually share part of the time tonight with Tim, who's going to speak to what living at this property is actually like and why one of the variances or exceptions is requested. Just as a reminder tonight in finding, hold on, here we go. In finding for the variance, I know you know this, but we wanted to just kind of make a point of the two causes and then our two separate concerns and what you need to find in order to do it. And we believe that in the exception for increasing the square footage over the FAR, that we check the box on finding that the current house has the same site conditions as properties adjacent, many of whom are larger over the FAR and two-story. We're also, even though we're over the FAR, we are the fourth largest house in our immediate neighborhood, and then it trickles down further from that beyond. And then, and therefore, because of that information, also the granting of this is really not a special privilege indicated for this property. Regarding reduced garage setbacks, one change over what Jocelyn has said, we've had a few extra meetings with the rear neighbor, and we are only requesting that the right side setback be reduced to 1 foot, and we are going to pull to the 3 foot at the rear setback to accommodate the rear neighbor's concerns. And this was after multiple meetings that they had with the owner, who can go into detail with that. So similar logic behind both these, and I think some of the graphics will help to show that. I'm sure you all know how to calculate FAR by now. So we are 408 square feet over the allowable FAR. However, again, not the largest house in our immediate neighborhood by fourth in the document, and still a modest home at 2,301 square feet. Just a little chart diagram about FAR in the neighborhood. We are the red hatched box as our project site. You can see that in our immediate neighborhood, unfortunately for us, because it knocks out 20% of people allowed, we have two commercial projects that have a pretty high density compared to ours. And unfortunately, the planning department doesn't consider those part of our neighborhood because they're not single family units. However, they really, really are part of our neighborhood. And I think you can see by this diagram, the dashed blue line indicates immediate neighborhood and the two houses that are over the FAR, and then our expanded neighborhood, well within walking distance of this property, are also over the FAR. You can see on this chart, we fall at kind of position 10 in our expanded neighborhood. So just graphically speaking, I think it's an easy representation of what is consistent with the neighborhood, which we are proposing to maintain. This is a picture on the left of the story poles that went up on this house, and then a rendering of what is proposed that you can see kind of fits nicely within the neighborhood. Most of the houses across the street, I'm sure you visited the site, are also two-story. We're actually lower in height than the majority of those. So from a bulk and mass perspective, regardless of FAR square footage, I believe that the home is suited for the neighborhood based on immediate neighbors. A similar graphic showing the reduced garage setbacks and then what the garage setbacks are over here and where we fall. Obviously, we are, again, the neighbor or the site in red, and neighbors that in both the immediate and expanded neighborhood that exceed the FAR. And we've included some pictures so you can kind of see how people have garages or carports converted to garages, kind of slammed right up against the side setbacks, many of them having a 0 setback on them. That's actually relatively consistent for this neighborhood. I think if you just kind of toggle back and forth between this graphic and this one, you can see that we are once again consistent with the neighborhood in our request. Again, I just wanted to reiterate, based on some neighbor conversations, we are moving to 3 feet at the rear to accommodate the neighbor at the rear, but we would like to maintain the right side setback reduction of to 1 foot. A little diagram here about what that does for us. So here's our proposed garage. The green indicates our garage door opening. While it is larger than a single car garage door opening, it does not meet current code for a 2-car garage opening, nor does the car because of this notch that's right here. You can see that the house footprint is here. We do have a cellar with square footage, and we have a light well at the back of the home here. the more we shove this building this way, the more we encroach on this light well and the egress to that light well, as well as ingress into the home. So part of why we want this detached garage shoved over is to really maintain the existing driveway that runs immediately adjacent to the side. It's 14 feet 7 inches wide, and we'd really like to maintain that. Our garage door is 12 feet, and that is actually set in 2 feet from that 1 foot, so 3 foot off. So this center line of the door and the driveway access are kind of important because, look, we already have difficulty getting in and out of the driveway. We don't need difficulty getting in and out of our garage as well. Then I'd also like to draw your attention to the fact that we do step down in grade a little bit here. So while we come down, we also are navigating some grade issues, which is what creates the need for these stairs to access this home from its detached garage. So based on code compliance with a light well and stairs and access into this house, the more we shove this over, the more complicated this becomes, and the more hardscape and grading we end up doing in the yard, creating really an unusable backyard, which is part of the consideration for really wanting to maintain that right side setback as well. This was a shadow study that was done to just show that moving the garage around had little to no impact on the neighbors, no matter what time of year. And then I'm going to turn it over to Tim for the last few minutes so he can kind of talk about what's hard about getting to and from his house.
Okay. I don't know if you want to point out. Why not? Ladies and gentlemen of the Planning Commission, thank you very much for taking time to review our plans tonight.
Could you state your name and
Oh, I'm sorry. My name's Tim Canepa. I live at 418 University Avenue in Los Gatos.
Thank you.
I guess that last part was obvious. I've lived in the town for 20 years, actually at the same location. We love Los Gatos. We love walking downtown, spending time downtown. We see our neighbors on the trail and friends on the trails, see our friends walking downtown. It's basically our home. My wife Cynthia, she is a co-chair for the Campo de Bocce annual charity event for Ronald McDonald House at Stanford, so we really like to support the community. We're very excited about being able to remodel our home and expand it to welcome in more family and friends. And we really want to maintain the character of the house. So that's why we spent time going to the historical committee and making sure that the house still fit in with the original design. In fact, I'm pretty proud of the fact that the 8 double hung windows in the existing house right now still all work pretty smoothly with a little TLC. All that said, the one challenge that we have is being in such close proximity to the corner here. It's very challenging to get in and out of the driveway here, and it's also very dangerous to park on the street right there. We've actually had 2 cars totaled, a couple of cars sideswiped, and I think in total with all of our neighbors, I think we've had a total of 10 cars hit or totaled. Oh, do I need to?
Forward your pictures.
Okay. Yep, that's one of our cars totaled. That's the car that actually hit it. You can see it's flipped over on its side. It actually ran up over the back of the car and flipped over on its side. We actually had another incident where our house was parked and hit. So a car drove all the way through my neighbor's yard into the side of the house and knocked my son's bed 4 feet. Fortunately, he wasn't in it at the time, but I mean, and you can see some of the damage here. So basically what we're asking for in the variance is we don't care so much about the back variance. I mean, you know, that was just to, as Beth said, to make a little bit more space there. But the side variance, moving the garage over 1 foot makes the access to getting into the garage pretty much straight back so that we can, I know it's not a 2-car garage per se by code, but we can still get 2 cars into the garage. Because one of the other problems we have by being in this close proximity is we've got you know, occasionally we need to swap cars because you need to take like the SUV out to go get something. And in order to do that, what we end up doing is usually it takes two of us. One of us comes out, drives out, does a little loop around
Your
on
time,
rate.
pardon me, stop. Your time's up, but I'm going to give you another 30 seconds, but
Okay.
then finish, please.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, so in order to swap cars, we have to take one car out and drive around the, you know, the little loop. My kids call it the loopy road. Drive around the loopy road and then, you know, put the other car back in. Final comment is that when you look at this, the way this contour has been made in the road here, you can see that the cars have to, you know, change angle here just to get past this parked car. Otherwise, if they go straight, they'll, you know, run into the back of a car like, you know, one of my cars that got totaled there. And the other thing is that when traffic is really busy here, you'll see cars come from way back here off the screen, drive on the opposite side of the road, and jump into the turn lanes here. I've seen them come back at least 10 plus cars. So what we're trying to do is get our cars off of the road just from a standpoint of safety and, you know, kind of mitigate some of the...
Your time is up, but we got your
Okay.
point. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Are there questions? Yes, there are questions, so we'll see who they want to direct their questions to. I'll start with Vice Chair Kane.
You may have said it, sir, but how many cars do you have?
3 right now.
3. I've seen your driveway, it's very narrow, and your cars were parked in head first. So you back out of there before you do the merry loop?
It depends. So I generally back in, so we'll either back in or go straight in, depending if we're coming from University in
Right.
this direction, we go in. If we come in off of Highway 9, we usually, you know, have to do a maneuver and back the car in.
If you turn your head, you need to take that mic with you.
Oh, sorry about that.
Everything you're saying is not going to be recorded.
Okay.
Thank you.
So if we're if we're coming around Highway 9 down University, traveling north, then we would back the car. We would, you know, maneuver the car and back the car in, which is no easy feat either, with the cars flying around the corner.
The wife speaking here.
Just identify yourself, please.
Cynthia Beveridge. So I destroyed the back end of one of our cars because I was trying to back in with my stepson, and the car came around Highway 9.
Yeah.
I got nervous. I hit the pole.
Yeah, this nice
So-
the nice utility pole that's
That happens.
right in the corner of the property.
Because I get really nervous when there's
Okay.
traffic coming in both directions.
All right, we have another question. Commissioner Hughes, I believe.
I'm just curious, did you explore putting in a full 2-car garage? Or is this solution, you know, really going to accommodate 2 cars?
I can let Bess talk to that.
Technically speaking, from a square footage aspect, the garage does meet a 2-car garage overall square footage. However, that's not how a 2-car garage is mandated by code. It's mandated by a minimum width and a minimum depth. While we meet that in depth, we do not meet that in width, and a large portion of that is due to the fact that we would continue encroaching over this way, which means we really can't get a turnaround into this, backing in and out. So we've done an oversized garage door because one of their cars is small, and they're going to pull it in and snuggle it over here, and the other one's going to go straight in. So it will be a 2-car garage for how they use it, but based on code standards in terms of minimum width at its entrance, it is not.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Badami.
Per Exhibit 4, you're asking also for a FAR exception, and this is a home for a blended family with aging parents. So the 3 cars that you have now, does that include vehicles for the aging parents? Are they there now? Will they be adding more cars?
No, they're not there now, and I don't anticipate that they'll be adding more cars, especially, for example, right now my father doesn't drive.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Hanson?
I was just trying to understand the use. So Right now, you park all three of your cars in the driveway tandem? Is that?
No,
Or
right
do you
now,
park some on the
currently, we
street?
have 2 cars in the garage and we park 1 car down the street a ways.
Okay, so in this model, you'll be parking 2 cars in the garage and then the third car goes behind, in front of the garage on the driveway?
Yes.
Okay. And, I mean, this isn't a comment on the zoning or the setbacks or anything, but I mean, it seems like, I don't, how much does that help your safety? Because you get 1 car off the street?
Yeah, we
Is
get
basically-
1 car off the street, and we'll also, depending on conditions, probably park it down the street as we've been doing lately.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Badami?
This might be a question for Ms. Worsima. Staff did provide us the immediate neighborhood with the FAR and the lot sizes, because you are asking for a FAR exception. And this is an extremely small lot. This chart here with the expanded neighborhood, I don't see that you included the lot sizes for the other homes that had FAR exceptions.
I did not include the lot sizes. However, I did include the FAR in this column right here. You can see the square footage in this column and the FAR in this column. And they're listed from high to low for the expanded neighborhood. So I just put the numbers. I didn't put their parcel numbers, but high to low, and then they're highlighted in blue. So for instance, there's 9 houses larger than us in the expanded neighborhood. There are 4 larger than us, but with less FAR in our immediate neighborhood. So it's a conversation about square footage and large home versus FAR also. I would contribute that if you drive down the street, and it always shocks me actually on this project personally, that there are not more houses that exceed the FAR. For instance, when you look directly across the street and immediately when you're turning onto it, the houses have much greater mass and bulk and volume. However, obviously some of their lots are bigger since their FAR doesn't pop on here as over their FAR. But their street frontage and their perception as a pedestrian and as a neighbor is much grander than our proposal, which is part of why we included this, to show you that we're really snuggled in there, actually. So while we do have an increased FAR, I do believe that we still architecturally are subtle in the neighborhood.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Kane?
Ms. Worsima, the staff provides on page 5 the addresses and exceeds or meets FAR. And I'm wondering if you've considered that where some of these guys look pretty big and exceed the FAR, it may have to do with the date they were built. Maybe those rules didn't apply at that time, but now they do, and we're kind of stuck with them. I used your dates from your chart. The houses read down 1900, 1938, 38, 1928, 1900, 1919, and 1918. I don't think they had a planning commission back then.
Thank God. I mean,
was on it.
oops, did you hear me?
Unless our chair was there. So that may provide for some of the exceptions. You certainly have a sticky wicket, and I've asked this question before. What's wrong with the staff's recommendation to solve this?
I do believe staff is in support of our increase in FAR.
The variance. Staff made a recommendation to not need to request the variance
That's true.
for the garage.
Are you talking about the garage?
Yeah.
Or the, staff made a recommendation to not support the garage.
Correct.
Correct.
And they also made a recommendation on how to solve it. What would be wrong with that solution?
Well, I think it's pretty clear in my mind when you look at this. We're talking about very minimal distances in connectivity here for circulation for both pedestrians and cars. And so shrinking the garage just to move it over does 2 hindrances for us. One, it complicates the building connections that are already detached from one another and have a slope where we're accommodating stairs and whatnot to get both down and up and a code compliant light well. And then also if we shrink it, I can't get 2 cars in there even with a substandard door. So I'm not sure that I would shrink the garage to move it over and accommodate absolutely nothing. I also have a neighbor on the right-hand side that is quite happy with the proposal at 1 foot over. I believe you have a letter in your desk item from them. So,
Okay, thank you. I'm good. Thank you.
Commissioner Janoff, you had a question?
Do you? Along the same lines, is there a fence between your property and the property to the, how would you propose you maintain the garage with a 1 foot clearance?
So this is a common thing I see, and I see this in construction also. And I think this just requires neighborliness. I live in a house with the same kind of thing, and my dog does a really good job of squeezing back there, much to my chagrin. However, if the house is built proper and done correctly, and we will have to access that side of the property from the neighbor at the time of construction for that in order to get construction, fire rating, et cetera, done properly. I would say that with today's current building materials that are far superior in terms of longevity and maintenance factors, I'm not concerned about that 1 foot section compared to a lot of things that you see with 0 lot line or 1 foot or less.
I was going to say, let me add to that. My neighbors and I have maintained the trees in between our properties for quite a number of years in a very collaborative fashion. So I don't think we ever would have a problem with that. In fact, one of the pictures somewhere here, that big pepper tree on the right, we've done.
Again, why don't you pull the mic out?
Okay. All right. Sorry. This big pepper tree on the right, we've done quite a bit of collaboration to make sure that we try to keep this tree as healthy as possible, because we feel like it's a very important historic element for the street and the neighborhood.
Although that's a tree the arborist, I think, believes is not long for this world.
That's what the arborist said,
That's what the
but
arborist said.
I've also had a couple other people that have gone by it before and said the same thing, and that was about 15 years ago. So I think that the tree might be smarter than all of us, or outlive all of us too.
Thank you for that. I've got another question about the garage proper. It's very difficult to read these numbers, but I think I'm making out that it's 21 foot 2 inches across the rear dimension.
That's correct.
Okay, and a standard garage width is 20 feet?
20 feet.
So you've got an extra foot there. My question...
Let me be clear. The garage code is 20 feet clear inside.
Okay.
This is an out-to-out dimension.
Okay.
Including
So
all building materials and structure.
And you have 20 foot clear inside, and yet you're not a 2-car garage.
Because of that right there.
So my question is, what is it about the staff's recommendation when they feel that your needs can be accommodated by respecting the 3-foot setback? What is it about their recommendations that you would dispute? I'm not hearing that they would suggest shifting the entire garage over, but it seems that they're suggesting that there is enough room, given that you don't have to have the 20-foot clear interior dimension, since it's not a 2-car garage. I'm just curious what your opinion is about why they believe you can accomplish what you want to with.
So I think one of the things that probably happened, and you can see that it's neglected in the letter of justification, is that there wasn't as much exploration done on the connectivity between these two buildings with the right-hand shift. And so I would venture to guess that have we provided them with additional information on that maybe they would have seen it our way, especially in light of the fact that there are many other garages in the area that also meet that 0 or 1 foot setback. But we focused originally on could we stack more cars and the back setback. But after neighbor discussions, that back setback went away to accommodate the rear neighbor, and that had been the primary focus in all the conversations, and I probably should have done a better job talking about this right here. This, to me, was more obvious from a code compliance as opposed to an amenity.
Second question is your dimension front to back. Looks like it's 23 feet and some.
I think so. Let me go to the bigger version. I can't read that either.
So the question is, if you were to reduce that front to back measurement down to 21.6, that's an additional 2 feet, that would help that corner that's impinging upon your turnaround area.
Yeah, but we're not talking about the front to back one anymore. We're going to change that to 3 feet.
Well, I understand you're not talking about the setback, but the dimension of the building.
I know, but
I don't know if
I've
that's
got
the
to be
current
able,
dimension.
but what we're trying to do, Commissioner Janoff, is actually snuggle 2 cars in there through an oversized 1-car door. So in order to do that, the more I pinch this down, the smaller this door gets, so I can build this structurally and seismically, and the greater the angle in this already tight, crazy train action that we're on happens.
What's the current dimension according to your drawing, front to back of that garage?
Front to back on this side is...
On the other side.
On this side is 22.4, out to out.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, go ahead. If you, pardon me? Oh, okay. We'll get there. All right. I think the time is up, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, I just want to establish, we didn't put on the record, did everybody visit the property? Everybody visited the property. Okay. We'll close. Oh, no, I have another card here for Jim and Jenny Woods. Good point.
Good evening. Thank you for listening to us for a few minutes. I'm here with my wife, Jenny. So I'm Jim Woods, live at 475 Raid Avenue, which is 2 houses. So Raid Avenue is behind University, so the house immediately behind this property, and then 2 houses down is our house. So when we go out in our backyard and from our kitchen window today, we look up and we can see kind of through the trees, there's an opening, and we can see the hills. And based on the story polls today, this will wipe out that view. So this will block our view of the hills. So we're concerned about that. Listening to this today, it's hard to tell how much of that is because the garage is moving closer to the back, and that's where the story poles are. It also appears as though there's not a view in the drawings that shows how much higher, how much taller the garage is. So it's hard to tell how much that's impacting it. But based on the story polls today, it does appear as though our view will be pretty negatively impacted.
Okay, let's see if there are any questions. Vice Chair Kane?
Mr. Woods, I live a block away from you.
I know, I see you in the neighborhood,
You're talking about your view out the back,
out the kitchen window and out the back.
but the
and,
view out
from
the
our
front,
backyard.
you've still got right over there.
Yeah, we can still see the hills from
How
the
much
front.
of the view out the back do you lose?
I'm sorry?
How much of the view out the back do you lose?
It'd be a guess, most of it, but I don't know. And my wife says all of it. I'll go with her view.
Thank you.
Wise man. Yes, Commissioner Hughes?
Yeah, just, is your home 1 or 2 stories?
1.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you very much. I have no other cards, so I guess we can call the applicant back for closing. Not required. Unless there are any questions that we forgot to ask. All right, that being the case, I will close the public input to the public hearing. And I'll ask the commission for comments, questions of staff, and ultimately a motion. I think Commissioner Janoff has had a long pending question.
Not so long pending, but related to what I was just asking. Could staff please comment, given the presentation regarding the pitch point that the architect has provided, was that information provided to you?
So as part of their justification, you're asking? So the justification was, when I worked with the applicant on this, was really more about neighborhood compatibility and other structures in that immediate neighborhood that had similar setbacks. We hadn't had that discussion about the connectivity between the back of the house and the garage.
So, a speculative question, given the information that the architect has presented tonight regarding the proximity of the garage to the ingress, egress, I guess, of the cellar area, this is on the reverse of the letter by the architect, and this evening she's presented an arrow that shows a particular distance between the corner of the garage and the staircase to the house and down to the cellar, I guess. If the garage were shifted, as staff is suggesting could be, in order to retain a 3-foot setback, would you be concerned about how close that corner of the garage is relative to the house, given that they want to be able to do, I guess, a K-turn or some sort of a turn in order to egress?
So there's two components. Both the town code and building code requires at least a 5-foot separation between the two structures. And so shifting it over, it still appears that they'd maintain that 5-foot distance. And then from a parking perspective, they would need to provide some sort of turnaround or access to show that 2 cars could safely enter into the garage and not have a disruption with that new deck. I don't know what that would look like since staff didn't receive that, so it's speculative at this point.
Other Commissioner, I think Vice Chair King, you had your hand up first, I think.
I wanted to hit the same old nail with the hammer. You made a recommendation such that the variance would not be needed, and the architect refuted that by saying it was impractical. Did you hear her refutation, and do you think there's some legitimacy to that? Like, I'm moving the garage to comply with town's recommendation, and by doing that, accomplishing nothing. I mean, therefore, how viable is our recommendation for an alternative solution?
Well, ultimately, these are the same types of compromises you guys deal with every day. They could move it over 2 feet, shrink it down 2 feet so it doesn't get much closer in the corner, make the notch different. There are a number of different options. I think what the applicant stated was then they lose that opportunity to put their, Mini and their Escalade in there, that they're going to try to squeeze the 2 cars in even though they don't meet our requirements or whatever vehicles they have. So, ultimately we look at the findings that are required. Some of those structures aren't necessarily garages that are 0 feet or 1 foot. They're just accessory structures. But those are things that the commission should take into consideration when they're making a determination as to whether or not those findings can be made.
So we could allow the variance, and by so doing, we wouldn't be affecting the neighbor who wrote us a letter on complaint, which complaint may have been resolved.
That complaint sounds like it's been resolved. The applicant stated that they're going to push the garage to maintain a 3-foot setback at the rear.
The complaint's been resolved. Now, whether we approve the variance or not, we still have that issue with losing the hillsides. Is that correct?
Yes, that's a separate issue.
All right, thank you.
Another hand was up. Commissioner Hudis.
I was just confirming with staff. A question, so staff has not reviewed the plans with the recent movement of the garage forward, is that correct?
No, staff was just made aware of that recently this week based on sharing public comments with the applicant.
Okay, and is it correct that, so part of your objection to the variance has been removed, but part of it hasn't, but assuming that they follow through on that you'll actually review the plans that are provided with the new location before approving, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Okay, if there are not, I would certainly entertain a motion on all jump. Anyone want to make a motion? Commissioner Hanson.
Just a brief comment before the motion. I generally am okay with this now that I've heard the evidence about the variance. And as far as the fire is concerned, it's to bring it to the next lowest fire is 32 feet, but it's also only 32 feet. So saying that, I would move to approve the architecture and site application S-17-018, as well as the variance application B-17-002, requesting the approval of the variance for construction of the accessory structure that does meet setback requirements and approval for construction of addition to a single-family residence that will exceed the allowable floor area ratio on property zone.
We're kind of
R1-E.
missing.
It said it does not meet setback. It just didn't have the word "not" in there. I can make the required findings for CEQA that the project is categorically exempt under the CEQA Act. I can make the finding for the required compliance with the residential design guidelines. And I can make the required findings for exceeding the maximum floor area ratio. And I can make the required findings for granting the variance application, and that because of the special circumstances to the property, including the size and shape, the strict application of the ordinance deprives such property of privileges enjoyed by other properties in the vicinity under the identical zone, and the granting of the variance would not constitute a grant of special privileges inconsistent with limitations on other properties.
You know, if you just tell us what you're reading from, we could just incorporate by reference, because I'm not really hearing what you're saying.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, I am reading from Exhibit 2, which is the required findings.
So if you want to incorporate by reference that language on Exhibit 2, then we'll have it and we can read it. Because I can't understand, or you can say it loudly if you want to.
Okay. So let me start again. I won't go through the whole thing. I'm moving to approve the architecture and site application for 418 University Avenue S-17-018 and variance application B-17-002. I'm using Exhibit 2 and the required findings for CEQA, the residential design guidelines, the requirements for the maximum floor area ratio, and the required findings for the variance application. I can make all those findings as well as the considerations and review of an architecture and site application.
Is there a second?
And also, I would incorporate the conditions in Exhibit 3.
All right. Commissioner Hughes?
I would be willing to second, but I would ask the maker of the motion whether that would include the movement of the garage to 3 feet from the property line, for the rear.
Yes, I'm assuming, even though it wasn't in the staff report, given the testimony that was made, that the garage would be moved 3 foot. So the only setback variation would be on the side.
Okay, then I would second the motion.
Now there's a second. Is there a discussion? Yes, Vice Chair Kane.
I want to underscore the dilemma that I find the applicant in, and why I would intend to approve the request for variance. I parked such that my back bumper was parallel to the beginning of the mouth of your driveway, and 3 people failed to hit me as I got out of the car. They tried. It was good that's a very tight spot you got there, and anything I can do to improve your safety, I would do. Otherwise, I might not do it otherwise. But you got a sticky wicket. I travel that street all the time, as you know, and I don't. Is the chief here? I don't pay attention to the cones, as a lot of people don't, because it is such a tight swinging back and forth. It's just not a good idea, and maybe town engineering should relook into that, Mr. Paulson. I'm serious. People who know what they're doing ignore those cones, and the people who don't know what they're doing try to obey the cones and hit cars. So that's what I wanted to say.
Okay, thank you.
And as far as the loss of view is concerned, sounds like that view was going to go away. Whether they got the variance or they didn't, they were still going to move that garage. So I'm sorry.
It's the second story of the house.
Oh, second story of the house.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Other comments? If not, I'll call the question. All those in favor say aye. It passes unanimously. Your comments, Mr. Paulson?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Anyone who's not satisfied with the decision of the Planning Commission can appeal that decision to the Town Council. Forms are available in the clerk's office. There is a fee for filing the appeal, and the appeal must be filed within 10 days.
All right, thank you. I'm trying to get to the, here it is. I believe we have 2 matters left. Election of the chair and vice chair, and then finally the report from the Director of the Community Development. So I will entertain, now we're under 5, so that's the election of the chair and vice chair. I will entertain a motion for the election of the chair. Do I have a hand on that? Well, we have to have a motion. Pardon me?
This is a,
He's
I'm
asking.
sorry, what kind of motion are you asking?
Well, we're electing a chair first, but to elect a chair, we have to nominate someone who will be considered for that vote. And I will be happy to nominate the vice chair, which is the normal course. So I would make that nomination, but I think I need a second, and then I have a second. I sound like an auctioneer. From Commissioner Badami, I have a second. Is there any discussion? If not, I'll call the question. All those in favor say aye. Well, pardon me.
I'm not clear on what we're doing.
We're called voting for a chair.
And who, and you're, who?
We've nominated one person, and that's the vice chair.
Okay, for the chair, okay. I didn't hear.
Getting later.
Just like you didn't hear my motion, I didn't hear yours.
All right,
So
all right.
you didn't say his name, so I was like, I was like,
I used his alias, the vice chair. All right, now that we've got it clear, and if there's no further question, I'll call the question, and all those in favor say aye. Aye, it passes unanimously. So now we get to do the same thing all over again for the vice chair. And as I said before, the normal course, the vice chair, not always, but in the normal course, would ultimately become the chair. So just keep that in mind. And again, just normally and historically, we wouldn't nominate somebody who just, for example, finished chair or maybe last year was a chair, so we can get some rotation here. So I will entertain a motion for the nomination of the vice chair. Vice Chair Kane, this is getting hard to say.
I nominate Commissioner Hudis.
All right, is there a second? Commissioner Badami,
Second.
is there a discussion? All those in favor? It passes unanimously. So now, as of the next meeting, we'll have a new chair and vice chair, actually, as of right now, I guess. So I'm not leaving yet.
You're no longer my neighbor.
I'm going way down there. So now we have a report from the Director of Community Development.
Thank you. Just a few things. Since the Planning Commission last met, the council met on December 19th, where they approved modifications to the Hillside Development Standards and Guidelines relating to visibility. They approved, granted the appeal for 26 Alpine, and they also adopted the general plan amendment for 202 University that the Planning Commission had reviewed and recommended for approval, and introduced the zone change for that. A couple of things that are going to be coming up. Next week, the council will meet, and two of the items that are on that are the continued consideration of the accessory dwelling unit ordinance modification. So we'll see if a decision is made then. And then another item would be the North 40 specific plan amendments. At their last meeting in November, I believe, November 14th, they gave staff some specific directions on about 5 modifications that they wanted to see. And so we'll be bringing those forward for their consideration and potential adoption of. And with that, that concludes my report.
Thank you. Vice Chair Kane has.
We used to have commission matters at this point, and so I have some questions or comments. I want to thank you for putting on the commission orientation. It was a consensus among those who'd been there before that it was the best one we've had. I would like you or me to go over the concept of excused absences. They gave us a quiz, and they asked us what is in fact an excused absence. I blew it. Mary got it right. There is no such thing as an excused absence. You're out, you're out. And if you miss 3 within a calendar year, you will have considered to resign your commission. Is that correct?
I will defer to Mr.
I said calendar. I meant rotating year.
Mr. Schultz, and then I would also say the clerk's department actually deserves all the credit for putting on that.
It was well
Yes, in fact, they told me I couldn't do my PowerPoint presentation anymore. I guess after 20 years of doing it, I was getting a little stale. So I enjoyed it. No, it was very good interactive. We had questions and answers, and then we had prizes, so we got everybody kind of involved in that. But to your question, yes, there is no excused, unexcused. We did away with that, I don't know, a few years ago at least. I think I've been here 4, and I think it was right when I got here, because it became too tough for staff to decide what's excused, what's unexcused. An absence is an absence, and it counts against you. For the Planning Commission, though, it's not 3, it is 4.
4 in a rotating 12-month. And I bring it up because I didn't know that, and I didn't know if everybody else knew that. Thank you.
I didn't know it.
All right. And
it maybe in the next few months, if we've got the ability and we've got a light agenda, we'll keep track. And if we've got a light agenda, maybe we can do just a quick update on some of the changes that were put into the commissioner's handbook policy-wise. Of course, absences is one of them, but there's a few other ones that council's been working on the policy.
will the commissioners get those updates?
They should, but I can check with our clerk.
Because Mary and I were good. We were there, but other people... No, we should get updates to the other commissioners. I have one other matter, please. Mr. Paulson, I pointed out tonight on one of the cases that the dates on the comparative houses may have value, like 1900. They didn't have any standards back then, so if you see a 4,000 foot square house, it could be because it was built before the provisions came into effect. I was wondering if staff from now on could please add an additional column and show the date of construction.
We can.
That
We don't see relevance in that, but we definitely can if that's something that you're interested in.
Thank you.
You guys aren't going home yet. I'd like to thank Commissioner O'Donnell for his leadership as chair this past year. His superior wisdom and your finesse has led to some very focused and rather spirited deliberations. So I thank you.
Thank you.
I wanted to add on to that. And thank you for the way that you've allowed for the diversity of opinion of this group to operate as an effective team. And looking at the different backgrounds of folks that we have on this group. And also, I think the way that you've provided a gentle legal perspective on things. That's been very, very helpful, and it's been a lot of fun to work on this commission. And
I have an extraordinary group of people to work with. I believe the chair should always hear from the commissioners first, so it's a pleasure to do that because what you folks say is worth listening to. And I don't always agree with everyone, but it isn't because of the quality of what you're saying. So I really enjoyed this year, and I've tried to have fun with it, and I've tried to share that fun with you. And sometimes my asides are so quiet, I'm the only one that hears them. And I think they're great. Those are the ones you miss. But anyway, it's been a pleasure this year, and I'll be glad to be sitting in the back pew next year.
Thank you.
So good night, all.
Hit the gavel.
Hit the gavel.